The Courts of Jamshyd by Robert F. Young. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. The Courts of Jamshyd by Robert F. Young. They say the lion and the lizard keep the courts where Jamshyd gloried and drank deep. The Rubaiyat. The dust-reddened sun was low in the west when the tribe filed down from the fissured foothills to the sea. The women spread out along the beach to gather driftwood, while the men took over the task of setting up the rain-catch. Ryan could tell from the haggard faces around him that there would be a dance that night. He knew his own face must be haggard too, haggard and grimed with dust, the cheeks caved in, the eyes dark with hunger shadows. The dogless days had been many this time. The rain-catch was a crazy quilt-work pattern of dogskins laboriously sewn together into a makeshift tarpaulin. Ryan and the other young men held it aloft, while the older men set up the poles and tied the dog-gut strings, letting the tarp sag in the middle so that when it rained, the precious water would accumulate in the depression. When the job was done, the men went down to the beach and stood around the big fire the women had built. Ryan's legs ached from the long trek through the hill country, and his shoulders were sore from packing the dogskin tarp over the last 5 miles. Sometimes he wished he was the oldest man in the tribe instead of the youngest. Then he would be free from the heavy work, free to shamble along in the rear on marches, free to sit on his haunches during stopovers, while the younger men took care of the hunting and the love-making. He stood with his back to the fire, letting the heat penetrate his dogskin clothing and warm his flesh. Nearby, the women were preparing the evening meal, mashing the day's harvest of tubers into a thick pulp, adding water sparingly from their dogskin water bags. Ryan glimpsed Miriam out of the corner of his eye, but the sight of her thin young face and shapely body did not stir his blood at all, and he turned his eyes miserably away. He remembered how he had felt about her at the time of the last dog kill, how he had lain beside her before the roaring fire, the aroma of roasted dog flesh still lingering in the night air. His belly had been full, and he had lain beside her half the night, and he had almost wanted her. She had seemed beautiful then, and for many days afterward, but gradually her beauty had faded away, and she had become just another drab face, another listless figure stumbling along with the rest of the tribe, from oasis to oasis, from ruin to ruin, in the eternal search for food. Ryan shook his head. He could not understand it. But there were so many things that he could not understand. The dance, for instance. Why should the mouthing of mere words to the accompaniment of rhythmic movements give him pleasure? How could hatred make him strong? He shook his head again. In a way, the dance was the biggest mystery of all. Miriam brought him his supper, looking up at him shyly with her large brown eyes. Illogically, Ryan was reminded of the last dog he has killed, and he jerked the earthen pot out of her hands and walked down to the water's edge to eat alone. The sun had set. Streaks of gold and crimson quivered in the wind-creased water, slowly faded away. Darkness crept down from the gullied foothills to the beach, and with it came the first cold breath of night. Ryan shivered. He tried to concentrate on his food, but the memory of the dog would not go away. It had been a small dog, but a very vicious one. It had bared its teeth when at last he had cornered it in the little rocky cul-de-sac in the mountains, and as further evidence of its viciousness it had wagged its ridiculous tail. Ryan could still remember the high-pitched sound of its growl, or was it a whine, when he advanced on it with his club, but most of all he remembered the way its eyes had been when he brought the club down on its head. He tried to free himself from the memory, tried to enjoy his tasteless meal. But he went right on remembering. He remembered all the other dogs he had killed, and he wondered why killing them would bother him so. Once, he knew, dogs had run with the hunters, not from them. But that was long before his time, when there had been something else besides dogs to hunt. Now it was different. Now it was dogs or death. He finished his meatless stew, swallowing the last mouthful grimly. He heard a soft step behind him, but he did not turn around. Presently Miriam sat down beside him. The sea glinted palely in the light of the first stars. "It's beautiful tonight," Miriam said. Ryan was silent. "Will there be a dance?" she asked. "Maybe." "I hope there is." "Why?" I don't know. Because everyone's so different afterwards, I suppose. So happy, almost." Ryan looked at her. Starlight lay gently on her childlike face, hiding the thinness of her cheeks, softening the hunger shadows beneath her eyes. Again he remembered the night he had almost wanted her, and he wanted it to be the same again, only all the way this time. He wanted to want to take her in his arms and kiss her lips, and hold her tightly to him, and when desire refused to rise in him, shame took its place, and because he couldn't understand the shame, he supplanted it with anger. "Men have no happiness," he said savagely. "They did once, a long time ago." "You listen too much to the old women's tales." "I like to listen to them. I like to hear of the time when the ruins were living cities, and the earth was green, when there was an abundance of food and water for everyone. Surely you believe there was such a time. The words of the dance—" "I don't know," Ryan said. "Sometimes I think the words of the dance are lies." Miriam shook her head. "No, the words of the dance are wisdom. Without them we could not live." "You talk like an old woman yourself," Ryan said. Abruptly he stood up. "You are an old woman, an ugly old woman." He strode across the sand to the fire, leaving her alone by the water. The tribe had broken up into groups. The old men huddled together in one group, the younger men in another. The women sat by themselves near the watering perimeter of the firelight, crooning an ancient melody, exchanging an occasional word in low tones. Ryan stood by the fire alone. He was the youngest male of the tribe. He and Miriam had been the last children to be born. The tribe had numbered in the hundreds then, and the hunting had been good, the dogs still tame and easy to find. There had been other tribes, too, wandering over the dust-veiled land. Ryan wondered what had become of them. But he only pretended to wonder. In his heart he knew. It was growing colder. He added more driftwood to the fire and watched the flames gorge themselves. Flames were like men, he thought. They ate everything there was in sight, and when there was nothing more to eat, they died. Suddenly a drum throbbed out, and a woman's voice chanted, "What is a tree?" A voice answered from the group of old men, "A tree is a green dream." "What has become of the living land?" "The living land is dust." The drumbeat grew louder. Ryan's throat tightened. He felt the refreshing warmth of anger touch his face. The opening phrase of the dance always affected him, even when he was expecting it. One of the old men was moving out into the firelight, shuffling his feet to the beat of the drum. The light reddened the wrinkles on his 30-year-old face, made a crimson washboard of his forehead. His thin voice drifted on the cold night air. "The living land is dust, and those who turned it into dust are dust themselves." A woman's voice took up the chant. Our ancestors are dust. Dust are our gorged ancestors. There were other figures shuffling in the firelight now, and the beat of the dogskin drumhead was sharper, stronger. Ryan felt the quickening of his blood, the surge of newborn energy. Voices blended. Dust are our gorged ancestors, our ancestors who raped the fields and ravished the hills, who cut the forest chains and set the rivers free, our ancestors who drank deep from the well of the world and left the well dry. Ryan could contain himself no longer. He felt his own feet moving with the vindictive beat of the drum. He heard his own voice take up the chant. Let us take the memory of our ancestors and tear it open, rend its vitals, throw its entrails on the fire. Our ancestors, the eaters, the putrefiers of the lakes and the rivers, the consumers, the destroyers, the murderers of the living land, the selfish, the obese, the great collectors, who tried to devour the world. He joined the stomping mass of the tribe, his hands going through the mimic motions of killing, rending, throwing. Strength flowed into his emaciated limbs, pulsed through his undernourished body. He glimpsed Miriam across the fire, and he caught his breath at the beauty of her animated face. Again he almost wanted her, and for a while he was able to convince himself that some day he would want her, that this time the effect of the dance would not wear off in the way it always had before, and he would go on feeling strong and confident and unafraid and find many dogs to feed the tribe. Then, perhaps, the men would want the women the way they used to, and he would want Miriam, and the tribe would increase and become great and strong. He raised his voice higher and stomped his feet as hard as he could. The hatred was like wine now, gushing hotly through his body, throbbing wildly in his brain. The chant crescendoed into a huge hysterical wail, a bitter accusation reverberating over the barren hills and the dead sea, riding the dust-laden wind. Our ancestors were pigs! Our ancestors were pigs! End of The Courts of Jamshyd by Robert F. Young. Read by Roger Melin.
The Towers of Titan by Ben Bova. Read by Thomas Copeland. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. The Towers of Titan. The landing port at Titan had not changed much in 5 years. The ship settled down on the scarred blast shield beside the same trio of squat, square buildings and quickly disgorged its scanty quota of cargo and a lone passenger into the flexible tube that linked the loading hatch with the main building. As soon as the tube was disconnected, the ship screamed off through the murky atmosphere, seemingly glad to get away from Titan and head back to the more comfortable and settled parts of the solar system. The passenger, Dr. Sidney Lee, stood by the window wall of the main building and watched the ship disappear into the dark sky. He was tall and lean, seemingly all bone and tendon, with graying dark hair and faintly haunted eyes, set deep into a rough-hewn, weather-worn face. When the ship was nothing more than another star overhead, he turned and looked at the place. 5 years hasn't made any difference, he thought. The single room of the main port building was unchanged, a little grimier perhaps, and a little more worn, but essentially unchanged. There were the same turnstiles and inspection machines, the same processing and handling gadgets for your papers and baggage, the same, it couldn't be, but they looked the same, 2 bored techs sitting at the far end of the room, unwilling to lift an eyebrow unless specifically commanded to do so. Lee walked over to the papers processor and pushed his credentials into its slot. After a few wheezes and clanks, its green light flickered on, and the papers fell into the return bin, properly stamped and approved. At the same time, his lone bag slid along a conveyor belt and onto the pickup table. With his credentials back inside his jacket and the bag in hand, Lee looked toward the two clerks. They were studiously avoiding his eyes, searching intently through some schedules that they kept on hand for just such emergencies. "Sid! Hi!" He turned at the sound of her voice. "I'm sorry to be late," she said, hurrying across the big empty room, "but we never know when the Ancient Mariner is going to arrive. It's not a question of whether it be on schedule or not, just a question of guessing how late it's going to be." He smiled at her. "Hello, Elaine. It's good to see you again." She hadn't changed either, and this time he was glad of it. She was still slim and young, her hair a reddish gold, her eyes gray-green. She was dressed with typical casualness, comfortable boots, dark slacks and sweater that outlined her trim figure, and a light green scarf for a touch of color. Outwardly, at least, she seemed cheerful. "Come on," she said. "I've got a buggy in the parking area. I wanted to get a few more of the old gang to come out and meet you, but there's not many of them left, and they're all pretty busy." Her voice trailed off. "I didn't expect a brass band and a key to the city," Lee said. Then he added, "You're pretty gay for a female scientist," he said. "I'm always gay when I meet old friends again." He said nothing. "I wish you'd cheer up," Elaine coaxed. "I will. Give me time." They entered the parking building and got into a bubble-top car. Elaine gunned it to life, and they slid out of the near-empty parking area, through the pressure doors and into Titan's unbreathable atmosphere. "Have you been here straight through since I left?" he asked. "No, I spent about 18 months on Venus, slushing through the swamps in search of ruins that couldn't possibly have survived a century in that climate. And that's it," she said, shrugging. "Something ventured, but nothing found. So I asked to be returned here. It's got you too, hasn't it?" Her face became serious for the first time. "Certainly it's got me. It's got all of us. Do you think we'd stay out here otherwise?" "Anything new turned up?" Elaine shook her head. "Nothing you haven't seen in the reports, which means nothing, really." He lapsed into silence and watched the frozen landscape slide by as the car raced along Titan's only highway. They crossed a bleak, frozen plain, bluish-white in the dim twilight from the distant sun. The stars twinkling in the dark sky overhead made the barren scene look even colder. The road climbed across a row of hills, and as they made a turn around the highest bluff, Saturn came into view. No matter how many times Lee had seen the planet, it had always thrilled him. Now, 5 years later, it was still an experience. 3 times larger than the full moon as seen from Earth, daubed with brilliant yellow, red, and orange stripes, and circled about its middle by the impossible-looking rings, Saturn hung fat and low on the horizon, casting shadows stronger than the sun's. "It's a compensation, isn't it?" Elaine said. Soon they were down on the plain again, but now it was a shattered, broken expanse of jagged rock and ice. The greenish methane cloud drifted over the face of Saturn, and Lee finally turned his eyes away. "You can see the towers from here," Elaine reminded him. "I know," he said. He could not make out any detail, but there they were, just as they had been for how long? 10,000 years? 100,000? 5 towers jutting straight up from the bleak plain, clustered around a central, taller tower. "Is the machinery still running?" he asked, pointlessly. "Of course." "There was some talk a year or so back about trying to stop it." She shook her head. "They wouldn't dare." The machine had been discovered more than 10 years earlier, when the first Earthmen landed on Titan. Saturn's largest satellite was devoid of life, a world of dark and cold, of hydrogen atmosphere and methane clouds, of ammonia seas and ice mountains. And there, in the midst of it all, stood the machine, a brazenly unconcealed cluster of mammoth buildings, with its 5 stately towers surmounted by the soaring central 6th. And within, row upon row of unexplained machinery, fully automated, operating continuously in perfect order. Alien. The discoverers soon concluded the machine was unbelievably old, older than the Egyptian pyramids, perhaps even older than the Martian canals, and it was running smoothly. For untold centuries, for uncounted millennia, it had continued to operate efficiently, tended only by automatic machines. A clear challenge to the space rovers from Earth. Who made this machine? How does it work? Why is it here? What is it doing? As soon as its discovery was made known, the machine was visited by a steady stream of Earthmen, physicists, archaeologists, engineers of 1,000 different specialties, and soldiers, politicians, men who were now forced to believe the inevitable. The machine was photographed, X-rayed, blueprinted, analyzed spectroscopically, philosophically, even theologically. Who built it? How does it work? Why is it here? No answers. Dr. Sidney Lee, an anthropologist who had made a name for himself by unraveling the history of the ruins on Mars, arrived on Titan full of optimism and enthusiasm. 20 months later, he was taken from Titan to a psychomedical center on Earth, completely irrational and suffering from man's oldest dread, the unknown. Returning to the underground center that had grown over the years near the machine to house the living and working quarters of the tiny scientific community on Titan was something like returning home for Dr. Lee. Someone had seen to it that he got his old quarters back again. Most of the people he had known from 5 years ago had gone elsewhere, but a few remained. Lee spent his first few days renewing acquaintances and meeting the new men and women. He was surprised at their youth until he tried to recall how he must have looked and acted when he first arrived on Titan. "Makes you realize how time takes its toll, regardless of geriatrics," he said to Dr. Kimball Bennett. Official director of the center, Bennett had called Lee into his office for a chat. "Come on now," Bennett scoffed. "You're talking like a man of 90. Why, you won't need geriatrics for at least another month." They both laughed. Bennett was a shy-looking, slender astrophysicist who spoke softly, never seemed to exert himself, and yet commanded the unabashed admiration of every member of the center. "All right," he said. "You didn't call me to discuss my failing years. What's on your mind?" "Oh, I just thought it's about time you got to work. You've been loafing around for a week now. We can't afford to feed you for free forever, you know." "No, I guess you can't," Lee agreed, smiling. Bennett leaned back in his chair and studied Lee for a long moment. "I won't ask you why you wanted to come back, but I was delighted when I saw the paperwork with your name on it. Want to know why?" "Now I am curious." "I want to leave Titan. I've been heading this operation for too many years now. I want out, and I really can't leave until I have a top-notch man to run this little show. You're my replacement." "As director?" "Yes." "Not me," Lee said, shaking his head. "I couldn't." "Why not?" "Why, hell, Kim, you saw them carry me out of here 5 years ago. How do you know the same thing won't happen again?" "How do I know it?" A trace of a smile flickered across Bennett's face. "Look, the fact that you returned to Titan, to this center, and to that infernal machine out there, well, that's proof enough to me that you've licked whatever it was that caused your breakdown." "Maybe you're satisfied," Lee countered, "but how about the rest of the staff? How will they feel about having a reconditioned neurotic heading the show?" Bennett's smile broke into an open grin. "Self-pity is a terrible thing. Do you know what those kids think of you? You're Dr. Sidney Lee, the foremost xenoanthropologist of the human race. You're the man who deciphered the Martian script, who uncovered the ruins of Tau Ceti, who did the definitive studies on the caveman cultures on Sirius and Vega. Your troubles here on Titan are just a 6-month incident in the middle of a dazzling career. Haven't you noticed the deference with which they've been treating you? You're a big man on this campus." "I don't know." "It won't be a lifetime job," Bennett coaxed. "In a couple of years, some of the young squirts around here will have acquired enough poise and self-control to run the show. Then you can go on to something else." Lee got up from his chair and paced slowly to the bookshelf that lined one wall of the office. "Why don't you stay on for another year or so, and then turn it over to one of the youngsters?" Bennett wordlessly extended his arms over the desk. His hands were trembling, almost imperceptibly, but trembling. Lee stared at the hands. "You too?" Bennett placed his hands palms down on the desk. "Do you think you are the only one who worries about an alien race who can build a machine that we can't understand after 10 years of investigation and study?" The official transfer took place the following day, shortly after breakfast. Bennett called a meeting of the 6 department heads and announced that he would leave Titan on the next ship. It came as no surprise. "From here on, I'm just an interested observer," he said. "Dr. Lee is in charge." He paused for a moment, then went on. "I thought this would be a good time to review what's been going on most recently and where we stand." Lee took an old pipe out of his jacket pocket and filled it while he watched them try to decide who would talk first. The 6 department heads all looked young and eager, he thought. Elaine was among them, of course, as head of the archaeology group. After a bit of finger-pointing and head-shaking, Dr. Richards took the floor. Head of the physics section, he had one of those open, clear-eyed, crew-cut faces that would look young even after his hair turned gray. "It just so happens," he began, "that we finished a study yesterday that may be of some slight significance." From the size of his grin, Lee judged that the physicist was making a weak attempt to underplay his speech. Richards walked to the view screen at the far end of the room and turned a dial. The screen flickered for a moment, then showed a chart. "You remember from our last meeting," he said, "that our group finally succeeded in reaching the generating unit that powers all the machinery out there. Dr. Lee, this is something we've been working on for more than a year. The power unit is buried in the sub-level of the main building out there, and it's damned difficult to get to it without tearing out other machines. We finally wormed a man down there about a month ago." Richards turned back to the rest of the group. "This chart shows what we've been able to learn about the power unit, which isn't much. There's no input to it, no batteries, no solar cells, nothing. There's a fuel tank, at least we think it's a fuel tank, that's sunk inside a cryogenic magnetic coil." Elaine spoke up. "You told us that last time. Have you been able to get into the tank?" Richards shook his head. "Not unless we break up the coil, which we don't dare try. It would probably mean destroying the power unit and stopping all the machinery. And we can't do that until we're certain of what the machinery's doing." "We all know that," said Dr. Kulaki, a wiry Polynesian who headed the electronics group. "Yes. Well, we did make a very elegant experiment," Richards continued, "a variation of Cavendish's experiment to obtain the gravitational constant in the 18th century. "Spare the history," Dr. Kurtzman said, half smiling. Okay, Richards said. "We determined the mass of the fuel tank, and therefore of the fuel in it. The tank contains a degenerate gas." "What?" "A degenerate gas," Richards repeated. "The stuff must weigh several tons per spoonful." Dr. Petkovich, the astronomer, frowned puzzledly. "Wait a minute. Degenerate gases are found only in the cores of certain types of stars. Are you saying that this magnetic field they've put around the fuel tank is strong enough to create a pressure similar to the weight of a star?" "Take a look at the chart," Richards said, pointing to the view screen. "If you know of any other type of substance with a density like that, I'll eat it." There was a brief conversation. Then Dr. Bennett said, "All right, Pat. Is that all?" "Hell no," Richards said, his cat-like grin returning. "There's more." He tapped a button on the view screen control panel, and another chart came up on the screen. "We know the power output of the generator, and that was simply obtained since the one unit powers all the machinery in the buildings out there. So we calculated all the known methods for obtaining power from a degenerate gas, and checked them against the amount of fuel the system has used up so far." Lee interrupted. "How do you know how much fuel has been used if you can't get into the tank?" Richard's grin broadened. "Oh, that's easy, Dr. Lee. We know how much a degenerate gas should weigh per unit volume. We know the size of the tank, and therefore how much it can hold when full. So we can estimate how full the tank is simply by measuring its mass and comparing it to the mass it would have if it were full. Doesn't the chemical composition of the gas have any effect on the mass? Wouldn't uranium be heavier than hydrogen? Yes, but not much. A factor of 100. You'll see in a minute that it's not enough to matter at this stage of the game. Lee nodded, and the physicist went on. Well, anyway, you can check out our math in the report we'll issue later this month. But it turns out that the only possible energy source for this gadget is total annihilation of the gas particles into energy. Total annihilation? How? That's a good question. I don't think we'll be able to answer it until we can start taking the damned machine apart. He flicked a new graph on the screen. But we can calculate how long the thing has been running, on the basis of the fuel it's used up, and the energy rates we've assumed. A slow wave of astonishment crept through the small room as one by one they grasped the significance of the curving lines of the graph. That's right, Richard said. Unless our rough calculations are completely off the beam, which I doubt, the damned thing has been operating continuously for something like 10 to the 5th or 10 to the 6th Earth years. 100,000 to 1,000,000 years. The rest of the meeting was quiet and orderly. They were all subdued by Richard's report. It's been running continuously for 1,000,000 years, Lee kept thinking. 1,000,000 years! He listened automatically as the other department heads made their reports. Ray Kurtzman was first. His report was actually a combined discussion of the work that his engineering group and Dr. Kulaki's electronics people had been jointly undertaking. They had tried to determine, for the nth time, just what sort of power was being beamed by the antennas atop the machine's towers. No luck. The machinery was using power, the antennas were broadcasting something, but whatever it was could not be detected by any instrument the Kurtzman and Kulaki had applied to the problem. Elaine gave a routine report on the latest digging expeditions that had been sent out. No artifacts, no foundations, no remains of any sort. Blank. Dr. Child, the short, sharp-voiced mathematician, gave his report on the department's analysis of the wave patterns that were being sent out by the antennas. The patterns had been deduced from the fluctuations in energy consumption by the antenna equipment. Child reported another blank. The patterns were completely random. "It's foolish to call them patterns at all," Child complained. "They look more like the ramblings of an idiot than anything produced by intelligence." Finally, Petrovich reported on the latest astronomical studies. The antennas were tracking an empty section of space between the Sun and the planet Mercury. Careful observations had shown no noticeable effect in the widespread area where the antennas were focused. "It is my belief," he concluded, "that the antennas were originally focused on one of the planets, but have since become disoriented in some way and are now well off target." Kurtzman huffed. "Not very likely. If they, whoever they are, could make this whole damned set of buildings full of machinery to operate continuously for 1,000,000 years, do you think they'd slip up on where the antennas are pointing?" "If it's 1,000,000 years we're talking about," Petrovich answered slowly, "then the chances for errors are simply that much greater." Lee decided it was time for him to step in. "Have there been any other attempts to date the buildings or the machines? Radioactive decay rates, or something like that?" Elaine nodded. "It's been tried at least once or twice a year, every year. Nothing conclusive has ever been established. The buildings are obviously very old, but 1,000,000 years?" They all lapsed into silence. Lee took a deep breath and began once more. "This 1,000,000-year business throws a new light on the whole subject. Up to now, I think we've all been looking at this machine on a day-to-day basis. We've been examining what it's doing now. It might be worth our while to sit back a little and try to extrapolate the behavior we've observed back over 1,000,000 years. Could you be a bit more explicit? Richards asked. I'll try. It's mostly a matter of viewpoint, I think. Let's start looking at this machine as something that's been in operation for 1,000,000 years. Let's admit to ourselves that what we see today is only a very small slice of the whole picture. Dr. Petchkovich, you're an astronomer. You're accustomed to studying a star for a few months and coming up with a story that covers perhaps billions of years, right? Yes, but this is entirely different. I know, Lee said, but the line of attack isn't so different. For instance, Dr. Child, suppose you send your wave patterns to the Orbital Computation Center at Earth and have the big brain work them over. Do you think it might come up with something useful? Child shrugged elaborately. Maybe. If we try to extrapolate the sample patterns we have now over 1,000,000 years, maybe something will show up. It'll take months to get the big brain's time, Elaine said. They're waiting in line all the way back to Mars for it. What are months compared to the time we've already spent? Bennett countered. Or to 1,000,000 years, Lee added. Kurlaki suddenly started to bob up and down in his chair. Say, we might be on the track of something here, he said. If those circuits have been in continuous operation for 1,000,000 years, we could learn an awful lot about reliability. Lee nodded in agreement. We have a lot to learn, that's true enough. He cleared his throat nervously. There's one more thing. I'm about to publish a paper. It's a sort of a general paper, but it has some bearing on the work going on here. I wonder if you'd be good enough to be a tryout audience for me. They sat back to listen. Lee gave only the basic outline of his paper. He discussed his findings among the ruins on Mars and on the lone planet circling the star Tau Ceti, and he drew some conclusions from his investigations of the primitive human cultures found on the planetary systems of Sirius and Vega. First, both Sirius and Vega have both been long known to be comparatively young stars. Astrophysical evidence compiled from the 20th century onward, and finally geophysical data from the planets themselves, showed that Sirius and Vega, and their planets, were considerably less than 1,000,000,000 years old. By contrast, the solar system was known to be at least 5 billion years old. Now, the development of life takes time. It took close to 3 billion years for life to make its first appearance on Earth. Another 2 billion years of evolution were necessary before man arose. If the planets circling Sirius and Vega are less than 1 billion years old, Lee stated, then the human populations of those planets, no matter how primitive they are, could not have originated there. They must have come from another planetary system. The closest system that could have borne life on its own is our solar system. Second, the ruins on Tau Ceti and on Mars were both definitely built by human beings. The plans of the buildings, their furnishings and utensils, the scant writings and pictures that survived, all were of human origin. Although dating the time of destruction of these buildings is very difficult, Lee went on, we can definitely say two things. They were destroyed suddenly in some immense cataclysm, and they were destroyed at very nearly the same time, both on Mars and Tau Ceti. I hadn't realized the correlation until this morning, but the destruction might easily be dated at approximately 1,000,000 years ago. There was a stir of reaction at the mention of the time period. Also, Lee told them, he had been able to partially translate one of the folk tales of the Vegan people. Stripped of its non-essentials, it tells of a cataclysmic war between the ancestors of the Vegan people and another race, mentioned only as the Others. He paused and looked at them, sitting around the table. They seemed engrossed. The Vegan folk tales relate that the Others won an overwhelming victory and smashed forever their golden age, when they traveled through the skies and lived in unbelievable splendor. I'd like to make one final point. The Vegan and Syrian peoples are hardly human by our standards. In addition to slight physiological differences, they live in caves and eat shellfish and giant insects. They do not hunt meat-bearing animals, simply because there are not yet any meat-bearing animals on their planets. The humans on these planets did not evolve there. They are 1 billion years ahead of the natural evolution of their worlds. Bennett spoke up. In other words, they were originally a colony from Earth. Exactly. That's a lot to swallow in one sitting, Patrick said quietly. I know, Lee answered, but it fits in with what we found here. Elaine, I'm certain that if you knew where to look, you could find on Earth the remains of a human civilization that is more than 1 million years old. She shook her head. That's contrary to every known scrap of evidence about early man. Besides, 1 million years of weathering would wipe out almost anything on Earth. Wind, rain, ice ages, earthquakes. It would be impossible. What about the moon? Petrovich asked. There should be some archaeological evidence on the moon that hasn't been completely destroyed. Maybe buried under the dust or lava flows? At any rate, Lee said, I'm convinced that there was a human culture 1 million years ago, that it expanded out through the solar system and to the stars, that it met an implacably hostile alien race, and that the humans were utterly defeated, nearly wiped out. And the machine out there? It was built by the others. It's alien and hostile, Lee said. That's why we must find out what it's doing and how. You could feel the change in attitude throughout the center after that conference. An invisible but almost palpable wave of tension swept through every office, every lab, every section of the underground community. Not everyone believed Lee's theory about the others, but they could never look at those strange buildings again without wondering. What had been a puzzling, frustrating riddle took on the attributes of a living, intelligent enemy, an enemy that mocked their efforts to understand, to control, an enemy that seemed in every way superior to the feeble powers of the men from Earth. A few days after that conference, Dr. Bennett left Titan for good. Lee was in full command now. He was just finishing a quick lunch at the robo-cafeteria when Elaine walked by and stopped at his table. Hi, boss. I'm on my way out to the buildings. Want to come along? Lee punched a button at the end of the table, and the dishes slid into a wall receptacle. No, thanks, he said. I've got some paperwork to do. Sid, you're going to have to come out and face it sooner or later. Why don't you come now? There's practically nobody there. He looked up at her. You're not a part-time psychotech, are you? No, she said, grinning. But I wouldn't want anybody to start thinking that you're afraid to go into the buildings, and I especially don't want you to think that. Okay, he said, getting up from his chair. You're right, as usual. They took a lift chute to the surface bubble, a dome of clear plastisteel that housed ground vehicles and miscellaneous outdoor equipment. There they squirmed into pressure suits, complete with fishbowl helmets. After checking out their oxygen tanks, heaters, and radios, they were ready to go outside. Want to walk? Elaine asked. Lee nodded. It took him a few minutes to get accustomed to the low-gravity shuffle that you must employ to walk on Titan, with its 1/3 Earth gravity. They headed for the buildings, under the double shadows cast by the distant sun and the ever-present, overpowering Saturn. The buildings loomed straight up from the dark plain, gaunt, gloomy specters from a bygone age haunting this shadow world. There were 5 low, square, featureless structures, ringed around a central, pentagonally shaped tower that swept upward to a series of spires and antennas. Several doors had been cut into the outer building's walls by the inquiring Earthmen. Originally, the walls had been perfectly blank. Did you bring a torch? Lee asked. Elaine shook her head. Don't need one anymore. We installed lights inside. They're tripped by a photocell as we crossed through a doorway. He could feel it coming on as they approached the buildings, the tenseness, the prickling along the spine, as if a deeply buried memory was writhing within his mind. Even before they entered the doorway, he could sense the throbbing, beating, purposefulness of the machines. And then they were inside, surrounded by them, row on row, tier on tier, inhuman, untiring, infallible machines, humming, growling, whining, filling the vast building with the rumbling power of their work, driving, constantly driving at their unknown tasks. Along catwalks that snaked through the maze of machines, automatic maintenance vehicles scurried along, stopping here for a quick adjustment, there for a replacement of a faulty part. No matter where the two invading humans went along the twining catwalks, the maintenance vehicles avoided them. If they stopped before a machine that was to be serviced, the maintenance vehicle would hover nearby, glowering at them, waiting for them to get out of the way. He could feel it again. The alienness, the lurking presence of an intelligence that scorned the intruders from Earth. Every nerve in his body screamed the same message: get out, get away, this thing is evil, hostile, a weapon against all mankind. In the conference room, telling them of his theory, he had inwardly wondered how much of it he himself really believed. But here, in the midst of these implacably efficient machines, he knew. This is the product of a cosmic hatred, the work of those who seek to destroy man, our ancient enemy, the unknown, the nameless others. Are you all right? Elaine's voice in his earphones snapped him back to reality. Why, do I look green? She came up close enough so that their helmets nearly touched. A little green, she said, smiling. It gives me the creeps, too. Want to go? No, he answered. Let's see the work that's going on. He took a firm grip on himself and went through it all. From the combined crews of archaeologists and engineers tracing wiring circuits to the handful of physicists conducting further tests on the power generator buried deep in the central building's foundation. It goes awfully slowly, Elaine said as they trudged back to the center. We're on the outside looking in, Lee said. If we could only determine the purpose of the machinery, then the rest of it would come pretty easily. They returned to the surface bubble and took off their pressure suits. Nearly dinner time, Elaine said, as they descended to the living area. How about eating in my quarters? She asked. Can you cook? You'll find out. A few hours later, he had decided that she definitely could cook, and that she had somehow managed to bring to Titan some of the best wine he had tasted in years. Now the table was folded back into the wall, and they were sitting together on the couch, listening to music tapes. What's that? He asked. Villalobos, a 20th century composer. Bachianas Brasilieras, number 8, I think. They listened in silence for a few moments to the moody, restless music. Reminds me of Topside, standing at the shore of the Ammonia Sea when a storm is coming up, he said. Elaine nodded. Yes, the wind and the dark and the waves. Abruptly, the music snapped off. Oh, damn, Elaine blurted. I thought I had the thing fixed. Let me take a look at it, Lee said, getting up from the couch. He tinkered with the recorder for a while, to no avail. I'm no electronics tech, that's for sure. Elaine shrugged. Don't worry about it. I'll have it repaired tomorrow. She went into the kitchenette and called back, How about some brandy? Fine, he answered. She returned and handed him a glass. Ad astra, he said as they touched glasses. Amen. Elaine walked slowly away from him, swishing the liquor in her glass. Let's go topside and see the stars, she said suddenly. Up to the bubble. Come on. So they left her one-room quarters and took the lift tube up to the bubble. It was deserted. Overhead, Saturn was low on the horizon, silhouetting the alien buildings. They turned to the other side of the sky, where it was clear and dark. Thousands of stars twinkled in the darkness. They made out Sirius and Vega, then Mars, and finally Earth, a bright blue jewel that outshone all the others. I guess Jupiter's on the other side of the sun, Lee said. Elaine nodded. It looks so far away, she said, staring at Earth, and so lonely out there in all that emptiness. A psychotech would call that projection. I know. We're the lonely ones, aren't we? She was perfectly serious now. "You know that Ruth and I have split up," he said. "I heard that she left you." He shrugged. "That's a matter of viewpoint. She got tired sitting Earthside while I battered around the solar system. When I told her I was going to Vega, she called it quits." "Couldn't she have gone with you?" "If she had wanted to." "Do you still love her?" Elaine asked. "I don't know. I don't think I know what love really is anymore. All I know is on that long trip out to Vega, when I had nothing to do but sit and think, it wasn't Ruth I was thinking about. It was you." "Oh." They talked a bit more, and finally he took her in his arms and kissed her, and she was his, at least for a little while. Weeks lapsed into months, and the work on Titan inched steadily along. If he stopped to think about it, Lee knew that all they were doing was scratching around the base of the problem and making precious little headway. The blind men and the elephant, he told himself. But then he asked himself what else they could possibly do, and the answer was always nothing. But the machine was still there, doing whatever it was designed to do, and he could sense the scornful laughter of its creators as he vainly tried to understand their work. Only the thought of Elaine, the sight of her, the touch of her, allowed him to keep his sense of balance. People left Titan, baffled and confused. New people arrived, eager, full of energy, excited at the chance to tackle the unknown, undimmed at first by the day-to-day frustrations of trying to unlock a door that has no key. Lee dialed his selection at the robo-cafeteria and waited a few moments for the tray of food to appear at the pickup table. He had spent the morning shut away in his office, searching months' worth of reports for some glimmer of encouragement. There was progress, of course. There was always progress, but it was never in a direction that would take them closer to the final answer. And carefully tucked into the top drawer of his desk was a nasty yellow sheet that bore a querulous message from Earth. "What is the status of the project? Why are expenditures constantly climbing? Is a 93-man staff really needed? When can some solid results be expected?" Lee picked an unoccupied table and sat down. As he started to eat, a quartet of young engineers, headed by Dr. Kurtzman, came in and sat at the next table. "I still don't see why they keep digging," one of them was saying. "They'll never find anything outside the buildings." Another countered, "Look, they've got to follow every possible angle. The only way we're ever going to understand this thing is to put together every scrap of evidence we can find until there's enough to form an understandable picture." Kurtzman shook his head. "Not at all. This isn't going to be solved by putting pieces together, like a puzzle. There's more evidence in those buildings than we can ever hope to digest. It's not a matter of adding up clues. This is going to be a gestalt. One of these days, somebody's going to get a few thousand million of his brain cells turned the right way, and he'll say, 'Aha!' Then we'll have it. Until then, it's our job to keep poking around, hoping to find the right piece of information to trigger the gestalt." The first one spluttered, "But that's non-scientific." "So?" Kurtzman asked, arching his eyebrows. "Do you see science making any great strides around here? We're in over our heads. Intuition is the only thing that can save us." "If we're that bad off, we might as well quit," the first one said. "In fact, that might be the best idea of all. Forget it and go home. Let the damned machine run for another 1,000,000 years if it wants to." Lee could not keep quiet any longer. "That would be fine, wouldn't it?" he said, turning on the surprised engineer. "Give it up and forget about it without knowing where it came from, or what it's doing, or why. I didn't mean— Listen to me. It's not just that the thing could be a weapon. It may not be, but we don't know. And as long as we don't know, we've got to keep trying to find out. Understand?" "Yes, but— And there's more at stake here than just an intellectual puzzle," Lee insisted. "If we turn our backs on this machine, we've turned our backs on a basic premise of all scientific thought. If we admit that we can't understand this machine, then we admit that there's an absolute limit to our ability to understand the universe. We give in to the old witch doctor's claim that there are some things in the world that man must not tamper with. Taboo. The basic nature of man and science is at stake here. We've got to understand that machine. Our claim to the stars is tied up in it. Lee looked up and saw that everyone in the dining hall was watching him. He stood up. "Sorry, I didn't mean to get so vehement," he mumbled to the engineer. "Guess I'm a bit edgy today." He walked quickly out of the dining area and returned to his office. Slowly, quietly, the work went on. Dr. Petchkovich spent 6 weeks on Mercury, supervising at first hand the investigation of the area where the machine's antennas were focused. He returned to Titan in high excitement. "We have definitely proved that there is a disturbance in the interplanetary magnetic field at the focal point of the machine's antennas," he announced to the department heads when they convened in the conference room to hear his report. "How strong a disturbance?" Dr. Kulaki asked. Petchkovich hesitated a moment. "Well, it's only 1 part in 100,000. The excitement died quickly. "It was a discovery, yes, but it did not bring them any closer to understanding the machine and its purpose." Lee was sitting at his desk, staring moodily at a graph that Dr. Child had left with him, the results of the Orbital Computing Center's extrapolation of the wave patterns broadcast by the machine. The phone buzzer sounded. Without taking his eyes from the graph, Lee flicked the phone on. "Are you busy right now?" He looked up and saw Elaine's face on the screen. "No, not really," he answered. "Come on in." "I'll be there in a few minutes." As soon as she came through the door, he knew that something was wrong. She was trying too hard not to look concerned. "What's up?" he asked her. She shrugged and sat down in front of the desk. "I just thought we might talk for a while." "In my office?" "Oh, it concerns official business." "I see." She looked at the graph. "What's that? Something new?" Changing the subject, he thought to himself, "What's she afraid of?" Aloud he answered, "It's Child's results from the big brain. The machine's wave patterns extrapolated over 1,000,000 years. He turned the graph around so she could see it better. Elaine studied it for a moment, then shook her head. Child was right, wasn't he? It doesn't make any sense at all. No pattern, no rhyme, no reason. "I don't know," Lee said. "There's something strange about these waves. They don't follow a regular pattern, and yet—" "What?" He frowned. "They're just too damned irregular to be really random." "That doesn't make much sense, does it? Well, anyway, I've got the feeling that I've seen this pattern, or lack of pattern, before. Somewhere I've seen something that looks a lot like this, but I can't remember where." Elaine looked at the graph again, at the multiple curves swinging back and forth across the paper, intertwining in seeming confusion. "It looks like some of the graphs I drew when I was an undergrad." He laughed. "Maybe that's where I saw it." There was an awkward silence. Lee got up from his seat and walked around the desk. He pulled up another chair and sat beside Elaine. "Now, what's the trouble?" "I've been thinking," she said slowly. I've decided to transfer off Titan." "Leave? But why?" "For us, Sid. For both of us. Before we get so wrapped up in each other that we won't be able to break it up without really getting hurt." "I don't understand," he said. She spoke calmly and softly, no tears, no hysterics. She had thought it all out very carefully. "Sid, take a look around you. We're like 2 castaways on a desert world. We love each other, here and now. But we won't always be here. What happens when we leave Titan? What happens when we're not faced with the loneliness and that thing out there? Suppose we find that we don't really need each other. What then?" "But I do need you, Elaine. I love you." "You do now," she answered. "But how long will it last? Sid, I have to get away, at least for a little while. I need a sense of perspective." "I see." he said, shifting his gaze away from her. "That doesn't leave me much to say, does it?" "All right, Elaine. Make out a transfer request and I'll sign it." "Thanks. I hope you understand." She got up and started slowly toward the door. "I'm not so sure that you understand this yourself," he replied, "but I know this. I don't want to lose you, Elaine. If you haven't worked this out within a month or so after you leave Titan, I'll come looking for you." She turned and without a word went over and kissed him. Then she quickly left the office. Lee returned to his desk. He sat down and stared at Child's graph again. After a few minutes, he angrily slapped it in a drawer, slammed the thing shut, and stamped out of the room. Personal matters were soon buried in the excitement of another discovery, this time an important one. It looked promising. Kurtzman and Kulaki finally discovered what form of energy the antennas were beaming out. After years of trial and error experimentation, the engineer and electronicist asked Richardson Child to lend a hand. With a firm theoretical and mathematical background to bolster their work, Kurtzman and Kulaki started out on a process of elimination. They soon proved that the antennas were not broadcasting any known form of electromagnetic energy, from gamma to long radio waves. They investigated one possibility after another, turning up a steady succession of negative answers. Negative, but answers all the same. It was time-consuming, but at least they were definitely determining which avenues were blind alleys. Then Child started tinkering with a hunch and showed his paperwork to Richards. The two of them made a few suggestions to Kurtzman and Kulaki. Their problem was that their detection instruments were drawing blanks when applied to the antenna's output, but the power input to the antenna showed they were working continuously. Child showed mathematically that their output must be an extremely weak, low-frequency form of energy. Richards agreed, and pointed out that there was only one known form of energy that fulfilled these conditions: gravity. "Gravity waves?" Kurtzman asked incredulously when they told him about it. Kulaki's mind reacted faster. Knowing it's gravity waves on paper and proving it experimentally are two different things, but they were up to the test. They had to scavenge equipment from the center's grav screen machinery, and the whole underground community was without its Earth-normal grav field for 2.5 days, but when the field was returned to normal, and people stopped hopping and bouncing all through the center, Kurtzman and Kulaki had proved that the antennas were indeed beaming out gravity waves. "It's all here," Lee thought, as he read their combined report. "Now we know what the machine is doing. But to what purpose? What influence does this have on Earth?" Then he put down the report and turned to another bit of paperwork that lay on his desk, Elaine's official request for a transfer. He looked through it automatically. There was a place marked Justification for Request. Elaine had typed simply Personal. Lee flipped to the last page and signed. He leaned back in his chair and tried to let his mind float free. Forget about her. Forget about the buildings out there. Forget about everything, at least for a few moments. Just drift and let your mind wander where it pleases. The automatic secretary in his desk hummed into life and announced, "Department heads' meeting starts in 5 minutes." To hell with the department heads. To hell with Titan, a world of cold and dark and ice. Like Dante's Inferno. Titan is hell, a place where sinning scientists are sent. Their punishment is to stand out in the cold and try to solve the unanswerable. Forever. Stand in the icy darkness and try to understand the unknown. Once in a while you make a discovery that excites you, but when you look again, your discovery is meaningless. You know as little about the real answer as you knew before. The discoveries are just part of the punishment, part of the eternal torment. They just keep you going after the carrot on the stick, but the carrot is always out of reach. "Department heads meeting beginning now," the automatic voice said. Lee cocked an eye at the tiny device. "All right," he said, getting up. "I'm going." The meeting was strictly routine. The reaction had set in. A week ago they had all been agog with the gravity wave's discovery. Now it had become apparent that the discovery had not opened the door they were trying to get through. "We're like children," Lee thought, "trying to put together a stereo transceiver from an assembly kit. All the pieces are there, but we can't get them together in the proper way." It was a short meeting. As they broke up, Lee saw Richards walk over to Elaine. "I hear you're leaving us," the young physicist said. "Going Earthside?" "Yes," Elaine answered, "for a while at least." Richards broke into his feline grin again. "Good. I'll be vacationing on Earth in a few weeks. Do you like to ski?" "I haven't skied in years." "There's a lodge I go to in Switzerland, really fine, and the skiing is marvelous. Even if you don't want to ski, there are mountains to climb, and glaciers." Lee started toward them, thought better of it, and walked sullenly out of the room. He went to his office, sat fidgeting at his desk for a while, then called her on the intercom. She was not at her office or her quarters, so the equipment automatically paged her. When her face finally showed on the view screen, Lee could see that she was still in the conference room, which was now empty except for her and Richards. "What is it, Sid?" Can you come down to my office for a minute? Right now?" She quickly covered her surprise. "Of course, I'll be right down." Within a few minutes she was entering his office. "What's the matter?" "Nothing," he said, gesturing her to a chair. "I just wanted to get you out of the grips of that all-American physicist." "What?" "Why, you jealous old goat." "Never mind. If you want to listen to propositions, please make sure I'm out of earshot." She laughed. "Is that what you brought me down here for?" "Yes." "I'm flattered." "Don't be cute." "He's a very nice boy." He frowned. "All right, so I'm foolish and juvenile." "And he's so interesting," she went on, paying no attention. "He was telling me all about glaciers in Switzerland, near this ski lodge. Seems the glaciers have been growing during the past few years, something I should really be sure to see." "Sounds fascinating," Lee grumbled. "Oh, it is. The glaciers, that is. They were retreating, you know, until a few years ago. Now they're growing again. It goes in cycles, it seems." Lee suddenly stiffened. "Great God of our forefathers! What now?" Instead of answering, he scrambled out of his chair and went to the floor-to-ceiling bookcase that lined one wall of the office. "Sid, what's the matter? Did I say something?" But he was not listening to her. "That's it," he was muttering. "That must be it." Elaine watched him paw through the shelves of books, desperately searching for something. "Can I help?" she asked. "No, I think—" He snatched at a book and riffled through it. "Yes! Look at it." He wheeled and shoved the open book at her. She nearly dropped it as he ducked back around his desk and rummaged through a pile of papers. "Here it is. Look at them," he shouted, handing her a sheet of paper. "Put them side by side and look at them." The book was opened to a graph, Elaine saw, that showed the advance and retreat of the Ice Age glaciers over the past 1,000,000 years on Earth. The sheet of paper was Child's graph of the wave patterns of the machine's antennas. Her face went pale as she looked at the two graphs, side by side. They're the same, almost identical. "It all fits together now," Lee said, drumming his fingers on the desktop in a restless tattoo. "The machine beams gravity waves into the interplanetary plasma between the Sun and Mercury. The effect is infinitesimal by our short-term standards, but over 100,000 years or so, the cumulative effect must be enough to block off a small fraction of the Sun's radiation. The Earth goes into a deep freeze for a few millennia." "But why?" Elaine asked. "Why did the others build it?" Lee paced nervously across the room. "Think a minute. They had beaten the Earthmen in a bitter interstellar war. They had done their best to wipe out the human race. What better way to ensure their victory than by subjecting our homeworld to violent climate changes? They probably thought they were guaranteeing the complete extinction of mankind. But the Ice Ages didn't destroy man, Elaine said. No, they reduced him to the level of a beast, though. Those few survivors of the interstellar war were robbed of their civilization. They had to go back to living in caves, to fighting the other animals for sheer survival. They made it, though, and relearned what was lost, and built a new civilization. Then the machine failed its purpose. Right, Lee said, but remember, it's only an automatic machine. Those who made it, the others, they're still out there among the stars somewhere. They're going to be mighty upset when they find out that we're not dead. It's terrifying, in a way. The important thing is that we understand. Now we can face them wherever they are. They're no more intelligent than we are. We've proved that by learning what the machine is all about. They may be older, and they certainly know more tricks, but they're not on a completely higher plane of mental development. Elaine leaned back in her seat. Well, it's over. At last it's ended. We can leave Titan for good now. Leave? Not likely. Now we can finally start to tear the machinery apart and see how it works. We've just been sniffing around it so far, treating it like a museum exhibit. Now we can shut the damn thing off and start dissecting it. There's a lot to be done, a whole new technology to be learned. How does it work? Who are the others, and where did they come from? There are more questions to answer now than ever. That means that you won't be leaving Titan? She asked. Not for a while. How about you? She thought for a moment, then answered, If you're right about all this, then there should be a lot of archaeological evidence awaiting discovery on the moon. Maybe I should organize a team. Then you're leaving anyway, he said. For a while, Sid. I'll be back in time. Stay off the ski slopes. She grinned and got up from her chair. Lee kissed her, and she turned away and went to the door. She looked back to say a final word, but he was already at his desk, punching buttons on the automatic secretary. All right, you mechanical marvel, call the department heads to the conference room for a meeting in 5 minutes, and take a message for the Terran Council Science Committee. Gentlemen, it is my belief that the question of the alien machinery on Titan is now essentially solved. End of The Towers of Titan by Ben Bova.
The Disintegration Machine by Arthur Conan Doyle. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Read by Ben Tucker. The Disintegration Machine by Arthur Conan Doyle. Professor Challenger was in the worst possible humor. As I stood at the door of his study, my hand upon the handle and my foot upon the mat, I heard a monologue which ran like this, the words booming and reverberating through the house. Yes, I say, it is the second wrong call. The second in one morning. Do you imagine that a man of science is to be distracted from essential work by the constant interference of some idiot at the end of a wire? I will not have it. Send this instant for the manager. Oh, you are the manager? Well, why don't you manage? Yes, you certainly manage to distract me from work, the importance of which your mind is incapable of understanding. I want the superintendent. He is away, so I should imagine. I will carry you to the law courts if this occurs again. Crowing cocks have been adjudicated upon. I myself have obtained a judgment. If crowing cocks, why not jangling bells? The case is clear. A written apology. Very good, I will consider it. Good morning. It was at this point that I ventured to make my entrance. It was certainly an unfortunate moment. I confronted him as he turned from the telephone. A lion in his wrath. His huge black beard was bristling, his great chest was heaving with indignation, and his arrogant gray eyes swept me up and down as the backwash of his anger fell upon me. "Infernal, idle, overpaid rascals!" he boomed. I could hear them laughing while I was making my just complaint. There is a conspiracy to annoy me. And now, young Malone, you arrive to complete a disastrous morning. Are you here, may I ask, on your own account, or has your rag commissioned you to obtain an interview? As a friend, you're privileged. As a journalist, you're outside the pale. I was hunting in my pocket for McArdle's letter, when suddenly some new grievance came to his memory. His great hairy hands fumbled about among the papers upon his desk, and finally extracted a press cutting. "You have been good enough to allude to me in one of your recent lucubrations," he said, shaking the paper at me. "It was in the course of your somewhat fatuous remarks concerning the recent saurian remains discovered in the Solhofen slates. You began a paragraph with the words, 'Professor G.E. Challenger, who was among our greatest living scientists.'" "Well, sir?" I asked. "Why these invidious qualifications and limitations? Perhaps you can mention who these other predominant scientific men may be, whom you impute equality, or perhaps superiority to myself." It was badly worded. I should certainly have said, "our greatest living scientist," I admitted. It was, after all, my own honest belief. My words turned winter into summer. "My dear young friend, do not imagine that I am exacting, but, surrounded as I am by pugnacious and unreasonable colleagues, one is forced to take one's own part. Self-assertion is foreign to my nature, but I have to hold my ground against opposition. Come now, sit here. What is the reason of your visit?" I had to tread warily, for I knew how easy it was to set the lion roaring once again. I opened McArdle's letter. "May I read you this, sir? It is from McArdle, my editor." "I remember the man, not an unfavorable specimen of his class." "He has at least a very high admiration for you. He has turned to you again and again when he needs the highest qualities in some investigation. That is the case now." "What does he desire?" Challenger plumed himself like some unwieldy bird under the influence of flattery. He sat down with his elbows upon the desk, his gorilla hands clasped together, his beard bristling forward, and his big gray eyes, half covered by his drooping lids, fixed benignly upon me. He was huge in all that he did, and his benevolence was even more overpowering than his truculence. "I'll read you his note to me. He says, 'Please call upon our esteemed friend, Professor Challenger, and ask for his cooperation in the following circumstances. There is a Latvian gentleman named Theodore Nemor living at the Whitefriars Mansions, Hampstead, who claims to have invented a machine of a most extraordinary character which is capable of disintegrating any object placed within its sphere of influence. Matter dissolves and returns to its molecular or atomic condition. By reversing the process, it can be reassembled. The claim seems to be an extravagant one, and yet there is solid evidence that there is some basis for it, and that the man has stumbled upon some remarkable discovery. I need not enlarge upon the revolutionary character of such an invention, nor of its extreme importance as a potential weapon of war. A force which could disintegrate a battleship, or turn a battalion, if it were only for a time, into a collection of atoms, would dominate the world. For social and for political reasons, not an instant is to be lost in getting to the bottom of the affair. The man courts publicity as he is anxious to sell his invention, so that there is no difficulty in approaching him. The enclosed card will open his doors. What I desire is that you and Professor Challenger shall call upon him, inspect his invention, and write for the Gazette a considered report upon the value of the discovery. I expect to hear from you tonight. R. McArdle. There are my instructions, Professor, I added as I refolded the letter. I sincerely hope that you will come with me, for how can I, with my limited capacities, act alone in such a matter?
True, Malone, true, purred the great man. Though you are by no means destitute of natural intelligence, I agree with you that you would be somewhat overweighted in such a matter as you lay before me. These unutterable people upon the telephone have already ruined my morning's work, so that a little more can hardly matter. I'm engaged in answering that Italian buffoon Mazzotti, whose views upon the lawful development of the tropical termites have excited my derision and contempt. But I can leave the complete exposure of the impostor until evening. Meanwhile, I am at your service.
And thus it came about that, On that October morning I found myself in the deep level tube with the professor speeding to the north of London, in what proved to be one of the most singular experiences of my remarkable life. I had, before leaving Insmore Gardens, ascertained by the much-abused telephone that our man was at home and had warned him of our coming. He lived in a comfortable flat in Hampstead, and he kept us waiting for quite half an hour in his anteroom, whilst he carried on an animated conversation with a group of visitors, whose voices, as they finally bade farewell in the hall, showed that they were Russians. I caught a glimpse of them through the half-opened door, and had a passing impression of prosperous and intelligent men with astrakhan collars to their coats, glistening top hats, and every appearance of that bourgeois well-being which the successful communist so readily assumes. The hall door closed behind them, and the next instant Theodore Nemore entered our apartment. I can see him now as he stood with the sunlight full upon him, rubbing his long thin hands together, and surveying us with his broad smile and his cunning yellow eyes. He was a short, thick man, with some suggestion of deformity in his body, though it was difficult to say where that suggestion lay. One might say that he was a hunchback without the hump. His large, soft face was like an underdone dumpling, of the same color and moist consistency, while the pimples and blotches which adorned it stood out the more aggressively against the pallid background. His eyes were those of a cat, and cat-like was the thin, long, bristling mustache above his loose, wet, slobbering mouth. It was all low and repulsive until one came to the sandy eyebrows. From these upwards there was a splendid cranial arch such as I have seldom seen. Even Challenger's hat might have fitted that magnificent head. One might read Theodore Nemore as a vile, crawling conspirator below, but above he might take rank with the great thinkers and philosophers of the world.
"Well, gentlemen," said he in a velvety voice with only the least trace of a foreign accent, "you have come, as I understand from our short chat over the wires, in order to learn more of the Nemore disintegrator, is it so?"
"Exactly."
"May I ask whether you represent the British government?"
"Not at all. I am a correspondent of the Gazette, and this is Professor Challenger."
"An honored name, a European name."
His yellowed fangs gleamed in obsequious amiability.
"I was about to say that the British government has lost its chance. What else it has lost it may find out later. Possibly its empire as well. I was prepared to sell to the first government which gave me my price, and if it has now fallen into hands of which you may disapprove, you have only yourselves to blame."
"Then you have sold your secret?"
"At my own price."
"You think the purchaser will have a monopoly?"
"Undoubtedly he will."
"But others know the secret as well as you."
"No, sir."
He touched his great forehead.
"This is the safe in which the secret is securely locked. A better safe than any of these sealed and secured by something better than a Yale key. Some may know one side of the matter, others may know another. No one in the world knows the whole matter, save only I."
"And these gentlemen to whom you have sold it?"
"No, sir, I am not so foolish as to hand over the knowledge until the price is paid. After that it is I whom they buy, and they move this safe,"
he again tapped his brow,
"with all its contents to whatever point they desire. My part of the bargain will then be done, faithfully, ruthlessly done. After that, history will be made."
He rubbed his hands together, and the fixed smile upon his face twisted itself into something like a snarl.
"You will excuse me, sir,"
boomed Challenger, who had sat in silence up to now, but whose expressive face registered most complete disapproval of Theodore Nemore.
"We should wish, before we discuss the matter, to convince ourselves that there is something to discuss. We have not forgotten a recent case where an Italian, who proposed to explode mines from a distance, proved upon investigation to be an errant impostor. History may well repeat itself. You will understand, sir, that I have a reputation to sustain as a man of science, a reputation which you have been good enough to describe as European. Though I have every reason to believe that it is not less conspicuous in America. Caution is a scientific attribute, and you must show us your proofs before we can seriously consider your claims."
Nemor cast a particularly malignant glance from the yellow eyes at my companion, but the smile of affected geniality broadened upon his face.
You live up to your reputation, Professor. I had always heard that you were the last man in the world who could be deceived. I am prepared to give you an actual demonstration which cannot fail to convince you. But before we proceed to that, I must say a few words upon the general principle. You will realize that the experimental plant which I have erected here in my laboratory is a mere model, though within its limits it acts most admirably. There would be no possible difficulty, for example, in disintegrating you and reassembling you, but it is not for such a purpose as that a great government is prepared to pay a price which runs into millions. My model is a mere scientific toy. It is only when the same force is invoked upon a large scale that enormous practical effects could be achieved.
May we see this model?
You will not only see it, Professor Challenger, but you will have the most conclusive demonstration possible upon your own person, if you have the courage to submit to it.
If, the lion began to roar, your if, sir, is in the highest degree offensive.
Well, well, I had no intention to dispute your courage. I will only say that I will give you an opportunity to demonstrate it. But I would first say a few words upon the underlying laws which govern the matter. When certain crystals, salt, for example, or sugar, are placed in water, they dissolve and disappear. You would not know that they had ever been there. Then, by evaporation or otherwise, you lessen the amount of water, and lo, there are your crystals again, visible once more, and the same as before. Can you conceive a process by which you, an organic being, are in the same way dissolved into the cosmos, and then by a subtle reversal of the conditions reassembled once more?
The analogy is a false one, cried Challenger. Even if I make so monstrous an admission as that our molecules could be dispersed by some disrupting power, why should they reassemble in exactly the same order as before?
The objection is an obvious one, and I can only answer that they do so reassemble down to the last atom of the structure. There is an invisible framework, and every brick flies into its true place. You may smile, Professor, but your incredulity and your smile may soon be replaced by quite another emotion.
Challenger shrugged his shoulders.
I am quite ready to submit it to the test.
And there is another case which I would impress upon you, gentlemen, and which may help you to grasp the idea. You have heard both in Oriental magic and in Western occultism of the phenomenon of the apport, when some object is suddenly brought from a distance and appears in a new place. How can such a thing be done save by the loosening of the molecules, their conveyance upon an etheric wave, and their reassembling each exactly in its own place, drawn together by some irresistible law? That seems a fair analogy to that which is done by my machine.
You cannot explain one incredible thing by quoting another incredible thing, said Challenger. I do not believe in your apport, Mr. Nemor, and I do not believe in your machine. My time is valuable, and if we are to have any sort of a demonstration, I would beg you to proceed with it without further ceremony.
Then you will be pleased to follow me,
said the inventor. He led us down the stair of the flat and across a small garden which lay behind. There was a considerable outhouse, which he unlocked, and we entered. Inside was a large whitewashed room with innumerable copper wires hanging in festoons from the ceiling, and a huge magnet balanced upon a pedestal. In front of this was what looked like a prism of glass, 3 feet in length and about a foot in diameter. To the right of it was a chair which rested upon a platform of zinc and which had a burnished copper cap suspended above it. Both the cap and the chair had heavy wires attached to them, and at the side was a sort of ratchet with numbered slots and a handle covered with India rubber, which lay at present in the slot marked 0.
Nemor's disintegrator,
said this strange man, waving his hand towards the machine.
This is the model which is destined to be famous as altering the balance of power among the nations. Who holds this rules the world. Now, Professor Challenger, you have, if I may say so, treated me with some lack of courtesy and consideration in this matter. Will you dare to sit upon that chair, and to allow me to demonstrate upon your own body the capabilities of the new force?"
Challenger had the courage of a lion, and anything in the nature of a defiance roused him in an instant to a frenzy. He rushed at the machine, but I seized his arm and held him back. "You shall not go," I said. "Your life is too valuable. It is monstrous. What possible guarantee of safety have you? The nearest approach to that apparatus which I have ever seen was the electrocution chair at Sing Sing."
"My guarantee of safety," said Challenger, "is that you are a witness, and that this person would certainly be held for manslaughter at the least, should anything befall me."
"That would be a poor consolation to the world of science when you would leave work unfinished which none but you can do. Let me at least go first, and then when the experience proves to be harmless, you can follow." Personal danger would never have moved Challenger, but the idea that his scientific work might remain unfinished hit him hard. He hesitated, and before he could make up his mind, I had dashed forward and jumped into the chair. I saw the inventor put his hand to the handle. I was aware of a click, then for a moment there was a sensation of confusion and a mist before my eyes. When they cleared, the inventor with his odious smile was standing before me, and Challenger, with his apple-red cheeks drained of blood and color, was staring over his shoulder. "Well, get on with it," said I.
"It is all over. You responded admirably," Nemor replied. "Step out, and Professor Challenger will now no doubt be ready to take his turn."
I have never seen my old friend so utterly upset. His iron nerves had for a moment completely failed him. He grasped my arm with a shaking hand.
"My God, Malone, it is true," said he. "You vanished, there is not a doubt of it. There was a mist for an instant, and then vacancy."
"How long was I away?"
2 or 3 minutes. I was, I confess, horrified. I could not imagine that you would return. Then he clicked this lever, if it is a lever, into a new slot, and there you were upon the chair, looking a little bewildered, but otherwise the same as ever. I thanked God at the sight of you."
He mopped his moist brow with his big red handkerchief.
"Now, sir,"
said the inventor,
"or perhaps your nerve has failed you."
Challenger visibly braced himself. Then, pushing my protesting hand to one side, he seated himself upon the chair. The handle clicked into number 3. He was gone. I should have been horrified but for the perfect coolness of the operator.
"It is an interesting process, is it not?" he remarked. "When one considers the tremendous individuality of the professor, it is strange to think that he is at present a molecular cloud suspended in some portion of this building. He is now, of course, entirely at my mercy. If I choose to leave him in suspension, there is nothing on earth to prevent me."
"I would very soon find means to prevent you." The smile once again became a snarl.
"You cannot imagine that such a thought ever entered my mind. Good heavens, think of the permanent dissolution of the great Professor Challenger, vanished into cosmic space and left no trace. Terrible, terrible. At the same time, he has not been as courteous as he might. Don't you think some small lesson?"
"No, I do not."
"Well, we will call it a curious demonstration. Something that would make an interesting paragraph in your paper. For example, I have discovered that the hair of the body, being on an entirely different vibration to the living organic tissues, can be included or excluded at will. It would interest me to see the bear without his bristles. Behold him!"
There was the click of the lever. An instant later, Challenger was seated upon the chair once more. But what a Challenger! What a shorn lion! Furious as I was at the trick that had been played upon him, I could hardly help from roaring with laughter. His huge head was as bald as a baby's, and his chin was as smooth as a girl's. Bereft of his glorious black mane, the lower part of his face was heavily jowled and ham-shaped, while his whole appearance was that of an old fighting gladiator, battered and bulging with the jaws of a bulldog over a massive chin. It may have been some look upon our faces. I have no doubt that the evil grin of my companion had widened at the sight. But, however that may be, Challenger's hand flew up to his head, and he became conscious of his condition. The next instant he had sprung out of his chair, seized the inventor by the throat, and had hurled him to the ground. Knowing Challenger's immense strength, I was convinced that the man would be killed. "For God's sake, be careful! If you kill him, we can never get matters right again," I cried. That argument prevailed. Even in his maddest moments, Challenger was always open to reason. He sprang up from the floor, dragging the trembling inventor up with him.
"I give you 5 minutes,"
he panted in his fury.
"If in 5 minutes I am not as I was, I will choke the life out of your wretched little body."
Challenger in a fury was not a safe person to argue with. The bravest man might shrink from him, and there were no signs that Mr. Nemour was a particularly brave man. On the contrary, those blotches and warts upon his face had suddenly become much more conspicuous as the face behind them changed from the color of putty, which was normal, to that of a fish's belly. His limbs were shaking, and he could hardly articulate.
Really, Professor," he babbled with his hand to his throat, "this violence is quite unnecessary. Surely a harmless joke may pass among friends. It was my wish to demonstrate the powers of the machine. I had imagined that you wanted a full demonstration. No offense, I assure you, Professor, none in the world."
For answer, Challenger climbed back into the chair.
"You will keep your eye upon him, Melin. Do not permit any liberties."
"I'll see to it, sir."
"Now then, set that matter right or take the consequences."
The terrified inventor approached his machine. The reuniting power was turned on to the full, and in an instant there was the old lion with his tangled mane once more. He stroked his beard affectionately with his hands, and passed them over his cranium to be sure that the restoration was complete. Then he descended solemnly from his perch.
"You have taken a liberty, sir, which might have had a very serious consequences to yourself. However, I am content to accept your explanation that you only did it for the purposes of demonstration. Now may I ask you a few direct questions upon this remarkable power which you claim to have discovered?"
"I am ready to answer anything save what the source of the power is. That is my secret."
"And do you seriously inform us that no one in the world knows this except yourself?"
"No one has the least inkling."
"No assistants?"
"No, sir, I work alone."
"Dear me, that is most interesting. You have satisfied me as to the reality of the power, but I do not yet perceive its practical bearings."
"I have explained, sir, that this is a model, but it would be quite easy to erect a plant upon a large scale. You understand that this acts vertically. Certain currents above you and certain others below you set up vibrations which either disintegrate or reunite. But the process could be lateral. If it were so conducted, it would have the same effect and cover a space in proportion to the strength of the current."
"Give an example."
"We will suppose that one pole was in one small vessel and one in another. A battleship between them would simply vanish into molecules, so along with a column of troops."
"And you have sold the secret as a monopoly to a single European power?"
"Yes, sir, I have. When the money is paid over, they shall have such power as no nation ever had yet. You don't even now see the full possibilities it placed in capable hands. Hands which did not fear to wield the weapon which they held. They are immeasurable."
A gloating smile passed over the man's evil face.
"Conceive a quarter of London in which such machines have been erected. Imagine the effect of such a current upon a scale which could easily be adopted. Why," he burst into laughter, "I could imagine the whole Thames Valley being swept clean, and not one man, woman, or child left of all these teeming millions."
The words filled me with horror, and even more the air of exultation with which they were pronounced. They seemed, however, to produce quite a different effect upon my companion. To my surprise, he broke into a genial smile and held out his hand to the inventor.
"Well, Mr. Nemour, we have to congratulate you," said he. "There is no doubt that you have come upon a remarkable property of nature which you have succeeded in harnessing for the use of man. That this use should be destructive is no doubt very deplorable, but science knows no distinctions of the sort, but follows knowledge wherever it may lead. Apart from the principle involved, you have, I suppose, no objection to my examining the construction of the machine.
None in the least. The machine is merely the body. It is the soul of it, that animating principle which you can never hope to capture.
Exactly. But the mere mechanism seems to be a model of ingenuity.
For some time he walked round it and fingered its several parts. Then he hoisted his unwieldy bulk into the insulated chair.
"Would you like another excursion into the cosmos?"
asked the inventor.
Later, perhaps. Later. But meanwhile there is, as no doubt you know, some leakage of electricity. I can distinctly feel a weak current passing through me.
Impossible. It is quite insulated.
But I assure you I feel it.
He levered himself down from his perch. The inventor hastened to take his place.
"I can feel nothing."
Is there not a tingling down your spine?
"No, sir, I do not observe it."
There was a sharp click, and the man had disappeared. I looked with amazement at Challenger. "Good heavens, did you touch the machine, Professor?" He smiled at me benignly with an air of mild surprise.
Dear me, I may have inadvertently touched the handle, said he. One is very liable to have awkward incidents with a rough model of this kind. This lever should certainly be guarded.
It is in number 3. That is the slot which causes disintegration.
So I observed when you were operated upon.
But I was so excited when he brought you back that I did not see which was the proper slot for the return. Did you notice it?
I may have noticed it, young Melin, but I do not burden my mind with small details. There are many slots, and we do not know their purpose. We may make the matter worse if we experiment with the unknown. Perhaps it is better to leave matters as they are.
And you would...
Exactly, it is better so. The interesting personality of Mr. Theodore Nemor has distributed itself throughout the cosmos. His machine is worthless, and a certain foreign government has been deprived of knowledge by which much harm might have been wrought. Not a bad morning's work, young Melin. Your rag will no doubt have an interesting column upon the inexplicable disappearance of a Latvian inventor shortly after the visit of its own special correspondent. I have enjoyed the experience. These are the lighter moments which come to brighten the dull routine of study. But life has its duties as well as its pleasures, and I now return to the Italian Mazzotti and his preposterous views upon the larval development of the tropical termites.
Looking back, it seemed to me that a slight oleaginous mist was still hovering round the chair. But surely, I urged.
The first duty of the law-abiding citizen is to prevent murder, said Professor Challenger. I have done so. Enough, Melin, enough. The theme will not bear discussion. It has already disengaged my thoughts too long from matters of more importance.
End of The Disintegrating Machine by Arthur Conan Doyle.
A Long Way Back by Ben Bova. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Read by Thomas Copeland. A Long Way Back. Tom woke slowly, his mind groping back through the hypnosis. He found himself looking toward the observation port, staring at stars and blackness. The first man in space, he thought bitterly. He unstrapped himself from the acceleration seat, feeling a little wobbly in free fall. The hypnotic trance idea worked all right. The last thing Tom remembered was Arnoldson putting him under, here in the rocket's compartment, the old man's soft eyes and quiet voice. Now, 22,500 miles out, Tom was alone except for what Arnoldson had planted in his mind for post-hypnotic suggestion to recall. The hypnosis had helped him pull through the blast-off unhurt, and even protected him against the vertigo of weightlessness. "Yeah, it's a wonderful world," Tom muttered acidly. He got up from the seat cautiously, testing his coordination against zero gravity. His magnetic boots held to the deck satisfactorily. He was lean and wiry, in his early 40s, with a sharp, angular face and dark, somber eyes. His hair had gone dead white years ago. He was encased up to his neck in a semi-flexible spacesuit. They had squirmed him into it earthside because there was no room in the cramped cabin to put it on. Tom glanced at the tiers of instrument consoles surrounding his seat. No blinking red lights, everything operating normally. As if I could do anything about it if they went wrong. Then he leaned toward the observation port, straining for a glimpse of the satellite. The satellite. 5 sealed packages floating within a 300-foot radius of emptiness, circling the Earth like a cluster of moonlets. 5 pieces sent up in 5 robot rockets and placed in the same orbit to wait for a human intelligence to assemble them into a power-beaming satellite. 5 pieces orbiting Earth for almost 18 years, waiting for nearly 18 years while down below men blasted themselves and their cities and their machines into atoms and forgot the satellite endlessly circling, waiting for its creators to breathe life into it. The hope of the world, Tom thought, and little Tommy Morris is supposed to make it work, and then fly home again. He pushed himself back into the seat. Jason picked the wrong man. Tom? Tom, can you hear me?" He turned away from the port and flicked a switch on the radio console. "Hello, Ruth, I can hear you." A hubbub of excitement crackled through the radio receiver. Then the girl's voice. "Are you all right? Is everything—" "Everything's fine," Tom said flatly. He could picture the scene back at the station. Dozens of people clustered around the jury-rigged radio. Ruth working the controls, trying hard to stay calm when it was impossible to, brushing back that permanently displaced wisp of brown hair that stubbornly fell over her forehead. "Jason will be here in a minute," she said. "He's in the tracking shack, helping to calculate your orbit." Of course, Jason will be here, Tom thought. Aloud, he said, "He needn't bother. I can see the satellite packages. They're only a couple of 100 yards from the ship." Even through the radio, he could sense the stir that went through them. "Don't get your hopes up," he warned silently. "Remember, I'm no engineer. Engineers are too valuable to risk on this job. I'm just a tool, a mindless screwdriver sent here to assemble this glorified tinker toy. I'm the muscle. Arnoldson is the nerve link, and Jason is the brain." Abruptly, Jason's voice surged through the radio receiver. "We did it, Tom! We did it!" "No," Tom thought. "You did it, Jason. This is all your show." "You should be able to see the satellite components," Jason said. His voice was excited, yet controlled, and his comment had a ring of command in it. "I've already looked," Tom answered. "I can see them." "Are they damaged?" "Not as far as I can see. Of course, from this distance—" "Yes, of course," Jason said. "You'd better get right outside and start working on them. You've only got 48 hours' worth of oxygen." "Don't worry about me," Tom said into the radio. "Just remember your end of the bargain." "You'd better forget that until you get back here." "I'm not forgetting anything." "I mean, you must concentrate on what you're doing up there if you expect to get back alive." "When I get back, we're going to explore the bombed-out cities. You promised that. It's the only reason I agreed to this." Jason's voice stiffened. "My memory is quite as good as yours. We'll discuss the expedition after you return. Now you're using up valuable time and oxygen. Okay, I'm going outside." Ruth's voice came back on. "Tom, remember to keep the ship's radio open, or else your suit radio won't be able to reach us. And we're all here. Dr. Arnoldson, Jason, the engineers. If anything comes up, we'll be right here to help you." Tom grinned mirthlessly. "Right here, 22,500 miles away." "Tom?" "Yes, Ruth." "Good luck," she said, "from all of us." Even Jason? He wanted to ask, but instead said merely, "Thanks." He fitted the cumbersome helmet over his head and sealed it to the joints on his suit. A touch of a button on the control panel pumped the compartment's air into storage cylinders. Then Tom stood up and unlocked the hatch directly over his seat. Reaching for the handholds just outside the hatch, he pulled himself through and, after a weightless comic ballet, managed to plant his magnetized boots on the skin of the ship. Then, standing, he looked out at the universe. Oddly, he felt none of the overpowering emotion he had once expected of this moment. Grandeur, terror, awe? No, he was strangely calm. The stars were only points of light on a dead black background. The earth was a fat crescent patched with colors. The sun, through his heavily tinted visor, was like the pictures he had seen at planetarium shows years ago. As he secured a lifeline to the grip beside the hatch, Tom thought that he felt as though someone had stuck a reverse hypodermic into him and drained away all his emotions. Only then did he realize what had happened. Jason, the engineer, the leader, the man who thought of everything, had made Arnoldson condition his mind for this. No gaping at the universe for the first man in space, too much of a chance to take. There's a job to be done, and no time for human frailty or sentiment. Not even that, Tom said to himself. He wouldn't even allow me one moment of human emotion. But as he pushed away from the ship and floated ghost-like toward the largest of the satellite packages, Tom twisted around for another look at Earth. I wonder if she looked that way before the war. Slowly, painfully, men had attempted to rebuild their civilization after the war had exhausted itself. But of all the things destroyed by the bombs and plagues, the most agonizing loss was man's sources of energy. The coal mines, the oil refineries, the electricity-generating plants, the nuclear power piles, all shattered into radioactive rubble. There could be no return to any kind of organized society while men had to scavenge for wood to warm themselves and to run their primitive machines. Then someone had remembered the satellite. It had been designed, before the war, to collect solar energy and beam it to a receiving station on Earth. The satellite packages had been fired into a 24-hour orbit, circling the Earth over a fixed point on the equator. The receiving station, built on the southeastern coast of the United States, saw the 5 units as a single second-magnitude star, low on the horizon all year, every year. Of course, the packages wavered slightly in their orbits, but not enough in 18 years to spread very far apart. A man could still put them together into a power-beaming satellite, if he could get there, and if they were not damaged, and if he knew how to put them together. Through months that stretched into years, over miles of radioactive wilderness, on horseback, on carts, on foot, those who knew about the satellite spread the word, carefully, secretly, to what was left of North America's scientists and engineers. Gradually they trickled into the once abandoned settlement. They elected a leader, Jason, the engineer, one of the few men who knew anything about rockets to survive the war, and the lunatic bands that hunted down anyone suspected of being connected with pre-war science. Jason's first act was to post guards around the settlement. Then he organized the work of rebuilding the power receiving station and a man-carrying rocket. They pieced together parts of a rocket and equipment that had been damaged by the war. What they did not know, they learned. What they did not have, they built or cannibalized from ruined equipment. Jason sent armed foragers out for gasoline, charcoal, and wood. They built a ramshackle electricity generator. They planted crops and hunted the small game in the local underbrush. A major celebration occurred whenever a forager came back towing a stray cow or horse or goat. They erected fences around the settlement, because more than once they had to fight off the small armies of looters and anti-scientists that still roved the countryside. But finally they completed the rocket, after exhausting almost every scrap of material and every ounce of willpower. Then they picked a pilot. Thomas H. Morris, age 41, former historian and teacher. He had arrived a year before the completion of the rocket after walking 1,300 miles to find the settlement. His purpose was to organize some of the scientists and explore the bombed-out cities to see what could be salvaged out of man's shattered heritage. But Tom was ideal for the satellite job. The right size, 5'6" and 130 pounds, no dependents, wife and 2 sons dead of radiation sickness. True, he had no technical background whatsoever, but with Arnoldson's hypnotic conditioning he might be taught all that it was necessary for him to know. Maybe. Best of all, though, he was thoroughly expendable. So Jason made a deal with him. There could be no expeditions into the cities until the satellite was finished, because every man was needed at the settlement, and the satellite could not be finished until someone volunteered to go up in the rocket and assemble it. It was like holding a candy bar in front of a small child. He accepted Jason's terms. The earth turned, and with it the tiny spark of life, alone in the emptiness around the satellite. Tom worked unmindful of time, his eyes and hands following Jason's engineering commands through Arnoldson's post-hypnotic directions, with occasional radio conferences. But his conscious mind sought refuge from the strangeness of space, and he talked almost constantly into his radio while he worked, talked about anything, everything, to the girl on the other end of the invisible link. And once the settlement is getting the power beamed from this contraption, we're going to explore the cities. Guess we won't be able to get very far inland, but we can still tackle Washington, Philadelphia, and New York. Plenty for us there. Ruth asked, "What were they like before the war?" "The cities? That's right, you're too young to remember. They were big, Ruth, with buildings so tall people called them skyscrapers." He pulled a wrench from its magnetic holder in the satellite's self-contained tool bin. "And filled with life. Millions of people lived in each one. All the people we have at the settlement could have lived on one floor of a good-sized hotel." "What's a hotel?" Tom grinned as he tugged at a pipe fitting. "You'll find out when you come with us. You'll see things you could never imagine." "I don't know if I'll come with you." He looked up from his work and stared earthward. "Why?" "Well, Jason, he says there isn't much left to see, and it's all radioactive and diseased." "Nonsense." "But Jason says," Tom snorted, "Jason hasn't been out of the settlement for 6 years. I walked from Chicago to the settlement a year ago. I went through a dozen cities. They're wrecked, and the radioactivity count was higher than it is here at the settlement, but it's not high enough to be dangerous." "And you want to explore those cities. Why?" "Let's just say I'm a historian," Tom answered, while his hands manipulated complex wiring unconsciously, as though they belonged not to him but to some unseen puppeteer. "I don't understand," Ruth said. "Look, those cities hold mankind's memory. I want to gather up the fragments of civilization before the last book is used for kindling and the last machine turns to rust. We need the knowledge in the cities if we expect to rebuild a civilization." "But Jason and Dr. Arnoldson and the engineers, they know all about—" "Jason and the engineers," Tom snapped. "They had to stretch themselves to the breaking point to put together this rocket from parts that were already manufactured, waiting for them. Do you think they'd know how to build a city? Dr. Arnoldson is a psychiatrist. His efforts at surgery are pathetic. Have you ever seen him try to set a broken leg? And what about agriculture? What about tool-making, or mining, or digging wells even? What about education? How many kids your own age can read or write? But the satellite won't be of any use to people who can't work the machines. The satellite is no substitute for knowledge. Unless something is done, your grandchildren will be worshipping the machines, but they won't know how to repair them." "No." "Yes, Ruth," he insisted. "No," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the static-streaked hum in his earphones. "You're wrong, Tom, you're wrong. The satellite will send us the power we need. Then we'll build our machines and teach our children." "How can you teach what you don't know?" Tom wanted to ask, but didn't. He worked without talking, hauling the weightless tons of satellite packages into position, electronically welding them together, splicing wiring systems too intricate for his conscious mind to understand. Twice he pulled himself back along the lifeline into the ship for capsule meals and stimulants. Finally he found himself staring at his gloved hands, moving industriously within the bowels of one of the satellite packages. He stopped, suddenly aware that it was piercingly cold and totally dark except for the lamp on his helmet. He pushed away from the unfinished satellite. 2 of the packages were assembled now. The big parabolic mirror and 2 other uncrated units hung nearby, waiting impassively. Tom groped his way back into the ship. After taking off his helmet and swallowing a couple of energy pills, he said to the ship's radio, "What time is it?" The abrupt sound of his own voice half startled him. "Nearly 4 a.m. It was Jason. "Earth's blotted out the sun," Tom muttered. "Getting damned cold in here." "You're in the ship?" "Yes. It got too cold for the suit." "Turn out the ship's heaters," Jason said. "What's the temperature in there?" Tom glanced at the thermometer as he twisted the thermostat dial as far as it would go. 49, he answered. He could sense Jason nod. "The heaters are on minimum power automatically, unless you turn them up. It'll warm you up in a few seconds. How's the satellite?" Tom told him what remained to be done. "You're not even half through yet." Jason's voice grew fainter, and Tom knew that he was doing some mental arithmetic as he thought out loud. "You've been up about 20 hours. At the rate you're going, you'll need another 24 to finish the job. That'll bring you very close to your oxygen limit." Tom sat impassively and stared at the gray metal and colored knobs of the radio. "Is everything going all right?" Jason asked. "How should I know? Ask Arnoldson." "He's asleep. They all are. Except you." "That's right," Jason said, "except me." "How long did Ruth stay on the radio?" "About 16 hours. I ordered her to sleep a few hours ago." "You're pretty good at giving orders," Tom said. "Someone has to." "Yeah." Tom ran a hand across his mouth. "Boy, could I use a cigarette. Funny, I haven't even thought about them in years." "Look," he said to the radio, "we might as well settle something right now. How many men are you going to let me have?" "Don't you think you'd better save that for now and get back to work?" "It's too damned cold out there. My fingers are still numb. You could have done a better job on insulating the suit." "There are a lot of things we could have done," Jason said, "if we had the material." "How about the expedition? How many men can I have?" "As many as you can get," the radio voice answered. "I promised I won't stand in your way once the satellite is finished and operating." "Won't stand in my way," Tom repeated. "That means you won't encourage anyone either." Jason's voice rose a trifle. "I can't encourage my people to go out and risk their lives just because you want to poke around some radioactive slag heaps. You promised that if I put the satellite together and got back alive, I could investigate the cities. That was our deal." "That's right, you can. And anyone foolish enough to accompany you can follow along." "Jason, you know I need at least 25 armed men to venture out of the settlement." "Then you admit it's dangerous?" the radio voice crackled. "Sure, if we meet a robber band. You've sent out enough foraging groups to know that. And we'll be traveling hundreds of miles. But it's not dangerous for the reasons you've been circulating. Radioactivity and disease germs and that nonsense. There's no danger that one of your own foraging groups couldn't handle. I came through the cities last year alone, and I made it." Tom waited for a reply from the radio, but only the hissing and crackling of electrical disturbances answered him. "Jason, those cities hold what's left of a worldwide civilization. We can't begin to rebuild unless we reopen that knowledge. We need it. We need it desperately." "It's either destroyed or radioactive, and to think anything else is self-delusion. Besides, We have enough intelligence right here at the settlement to build a new civilization, better than the old one, once the satellite is ready." "But you don't!" Tom shouted. "You poor damned fool, you don't even realize how much you don't know." "This is a waste of time," Jason snapped. "Get outside and finish your work." "I'm still cold, damn it," Tom said. He glanced at the thermometer on the control console. "Jason, it's below freezing in here." "What?" "The heating unit isn't working at all." "Impossible. You must have turned it off instead of on." "I can read, damn it. It's turned as high as it'll go." "What's the internal thermometer reading?" Tom looked. "Barely 30, and it's still going down." "Hold on. I'll wake Arnoldson and the electrical engineers." Silence. Tom stared at the inanimate radio, which gave off only the whines and scratches of lightning and sun and stars, all far distant from him. For all his senses could tell him, he was the last living thing in the universe. "Sure. Call a conference," Tom thought. "How much more work is there to be done?" "About 24 hours, he said. "Another day and another full night." Another night, this time with no heat, and maybe no oxygen either. The heaters must have been working tonight until I pushed them up to full power. Something must have blown out. Maybe it's just a broken wire. I could fix that if they tell me how. But if it's not, no heat tomorrow night. No heat at all. Then Arnoldson's voice floated up through the radio speaker, soft, friendly, calm, soothing. The next thing Tom knew, he was putting on his helmet. Sunlight was lancing through the tinted observation port, and the ship was noticeably warmer. "What happened?" he mumbled through the dissolving haze of hypnosis. "It's all right, Tom," Ruth's voice. "Dr. Arnoldson put you under and had you check the ship's wiring. Now he and Jason and the engineers are figuring out what to do. They said it's nothing to worry about. They'll have everything figured out in a couple of hours." "And I'm to work on the satellite until they're ready?" "Yes." "Don't call us, we'll call you." "What?" "Nothing." "It's all right, Tom. Don't worry." "Sure, Ruth, I'm not worried. That makes us both liars." He worked mechanically, handling the unfamiliar machinery with the engineer's knowledge through Arnoldson's hypnotic communication. Just like the pictures they used to show of nuclear engineers handling radioactive materials with remotely controlled mechanical hands from behind a concrete wall. I'm only a pair of hands, a couple of opposed thumbs, a fortunate mutation of a self-conscious simian. But God, why don't they call? She said it wasn't anything big, just the wiring, probably. Then why don't they call? He tried to work without thinking about anything, but he couldn't force his mind into stillness. Even if I can fix the heaters, even if I don't freeze to death, I might run out of oxygen. And how am I going to land the ship? The takeoff was automatic, but even Jason and Arnoldson can't make a pilot out of me. "Tom?" Jason's voice. "Yes." He jerked to attention and floated free of the satellite. "We've checked what you told us about the ship's electrical system while Arnoldson had you under the hypnotic trance." "And?" "Well, it looks as though one of the batteries gave out. The batteries feed all the ship's lights, heat, and electrical power. With one of them out, you don't have enough power to run the heaters." "There's no way to fix it?" "Not unless you cut out something else, and you need everything else, the radio, the controls, the oxygen pumps." "What about the lights? I don't need them. I've got the lamp on my suit helmet." "They don't take as much power as the heaters do." "It wouldn't help at all." Tom twisted weightlessly and stared back at Earth. "Well, just what the hell am I supposed to do?" "Don't get excited," Jason's voice grated in his earphones. "We've calculated it all out. According to our figures, your suit will store enough heat during the day to last the night. I nearly froze to death last night, and the ship was heated most of the time." "It will get cold," Jason's voice answered calmly, "but you should be able to make it. Your own body warmth will be stored by the suit's insulation, and that will help somewhat. But you must not open the suit all night, not even to take off your helmet." "And the oxygen?" You can take all the replacement cylinders from the ship and keep them at the satellite. The time you save by not having to go back and forth to the ship for fresh oxygen will give you about an hour's extra margin. You should be able to make it." Tom nodded. "And of course I'm expected to work on the satellite right through the night. It will help you keep your mind off the cold. If we see that you're not going to make it, either because of the cold or the oxygen, we'll warn you, and you can return to the settlement. Suppose I have enough oxygen to just finish the satellite, but if I do, I won't have enough to fly home. Will you warn me then?" "Don't be dramatic." "Go to hell." "Dr. Arnoldson said he could put you under," Jason continued unemotionally, "but he thinks you might freeze once your conscious mind went asleep." "You figured out all the details," Tom muttered. "All I have to do is put your damned satellite together without freezing to death, and then fly 22,500 miles back home before my air runs out. Simple." He glanced at the sun, still glaring bright even through his tinted visor. It was nearly on the edge of the Earth disk. "All right," Tom said. "I'm going into the ship now for some pills. It's nearly sunset." Cold. Dark and so cold that numbers lost their meaning. Paralyzing cold, seeping in through the suit while you worked, crawling up your limbs until you could hardly move. The whole universe hung up in the sky and looked down on the small, cold figure of a man, struggling blindly with machinery he could not understand. Dark. Dark and cold. Ruth stayed on the radio as long as Jason would allow her, talking to Tom, keeping the link with life and warmth. But finally Jason took over and the radio went silent. "So don't talk," Tom growled silently. "I can keep warm just by hating you, Jason." He worked through the frigid night, struggling ant-like with huge pieces of equipment. Slowly he assembled the big parabolic mirror, the sighting mechanism, and the atomic converter. With dreamy motions he started connecting the intricate wiring systems. And all the while he raged at himself. Why? Why did it have to be this way? Why me? Why did I agree to do this? I knew I'd never live through it. Why did I do it? He retraced the days of his life. The preparations for the flight, the arguments with Jason over exploring the cities, his trek from Chicago to the settlement, the aimless years after the radiation death of his 2 boys and Marjorie, his wife. Marjorie and the boys, lying sick month after month, dying one after the other in a cancerous agony, while he stood by helplessly in the ruins of what had been their home. "No," his mind warned him, "don't think of that. Not that. Think of Jason. Jason, who prevents you from doing the one thing you want, who is taking your life from you. Jason, the peerless leader. Jason, who's afraid of the cities. Why? Why is he afraid of the cities? That's the hub of everything down there. Why does Jason fear the cities?" It wasn't until he finished connecting the satellite's last unit, the sighting mechanism, that Tom realized the answer. One answer, and everything fell into place. Everything except what Tom Morris was going to do about it. Tom squinted through the twin telescopes of the sighting mechanism again, then pushed away and floated free, staring at the earth bathed in pale moonlight. What do I do now? For an instant he was close to panic, but he forced it down. "Think," he said to himself. "You're supposed to be a Homo sapiens. Use that brain. Think." The long night ended. The sun swung around from behind the bulk of earth. Tom looked at it as he felt its warmth penetrating the insulated suit, and he knew it was the last time he would see the sun. He felt no more anger. Even his hatred of Jason was drained out of him now. In its place was a sense of finality. He spoke into his helmet mic. "Jason?" "He is in conference with the astronomers," Dr. Arnoldson's voice. "Get him for me, please." A few minutes of silence, broken only by the star whisperings in his earphones. Jason's voice was carefully modulated. "Tom, you made it." "I made it, and the satellite's finished." It's finished. Good. Now, what we have to do— Wait, Tom interrupted. It's finished, but it's useless. What? Tom twisted around to look at the completed satellite, its oddly angled framework and bulbous machinery glinting fiercely in the newly risen sun. After I finished it, I looked through the sighting mechanism to make certain the satellite's transmitters were correctly aimed at the settlement. Nobody told me to, but nobody said not to either, so I looked. It's a simple mechanism. The transmitters are pointed smack in the middle of Hudson's Bay. You're sure? Certainly. You can rotate the antennas. I know. I tried it. I can turn them as far south as the Great Lakes. A long pause. I was afraid of this, Jason's voice said evenly. I'll bet you were, Tom answered to himself. You must have moved the satellite out of position while assembling its components. So, my work here comes to nothing because the satellite's power beam can't reach the settlement's receivers. Not unless you use the ship to tow the satellite into the proper orbital position, Jason stammered. You actually went through with it, Tom thought. Aloud, he said, but if I use the ship's engine to tow the satellite, I won't have enough fuel left to get back to Earth, will I? Not to mention oxygen. A longer pause. No. I have 2 questions, Jason. I think I know the answers to them both, but I'll ask you anyway. 1, you knew this would happen, didn't you? What do you mean? You calculated this insane business down to the last drop of sweat, Tom growled. You knew that I'd knocked the satellite out of position while I was working on it, and the only way to get it back in the right orbit would be for me to tow it back and strand myself up here. This is a suicide mission, isn't it, Jason? That's not true. Don't bother defending yourself. I don't hate you anymore, Jason. I understand you, damn it. You made our deal as much to get rid of me as to get your precious satellite put together. No one can force you to tow the satellite. Sure, I can leave it where it is and come back home, if I can fly this ship, which I doubt. And what would I come back to? I left a world without power. I'd return to a world without hope. And some dark night one of your disappointed young goons would catch up with me, and no one would blame him, would they? Jason's voice was brittle. You'll tow it into position? After you answer my second question, Tom countered. Why are you afraid of the cities? Afraid? I'm not afraid. Yes, you are. Oh, you could use the hope of exploring the cities to lure me up here on this suicide job, but you knew I'd never be back to claim my half of the bargain. You're afraid of the cities, and I think I know why. You're afraid of the unknown quantity they represent, distrustful of your own leadership when new problems arise. We've worked for more than 10 years to make this settlement what it is, Jason fumed. We fought and died to keep those marauding lunatics from wrecking us. We are mankind's last hope. We can't afford to let others in. They're not scientists. They wouldn't understand. They'd ruin everything. Mankind's last hope, terrified of men. Tom was suddenly tired, weary of the whole struggle. But there was something he had to tell them. Listen, Jason, he said. The walls you've built around the settlement weren't meant to keep you from going outside. You're not a self-sufficient little community. You're cut off from mankind's memory, from his dreams, from his ambitions. You can't even start to rebuild a civilization, and if you do try, don't you think the people outside will learn about it? Don't you think they've got a right to share in whatever progress the settlement makes? And if you don't let them, don't you realize that they'll destroy the settlement? Silence. I'm a historian, Tom continued, and I know that a civilization can't exist in a vacuum. If outsiders don't conquer it, it'll rot from within. It's happened to Babylonia, Greece, Rome, China even, over and over again. The Soviets built an iron curtain around themselves and wiped themselves out because of it. Don't you see, Jason? There are only 2 types of animals on this planet, the gamblers, and the extinct. It won't be easy to live with the outsiders. There'll be problems of every type, but the alternative is decay and destruction. You've got to take the chance. If you don't, you're dead." A long silence. Finally, Jason said, "You've only got about a half-hour's worth of oxygen left. Will you tow the satellite into the proper position?" Tom stared at the planet unseeingly. "Yes," he mumbled. "I'll have to check some calculations with the astronomers." Jason's voice buzzed flatly in his earphones. A background murmur, scarcely audible over the crackling static. Then Ruth's voice broke through. "Tom, Tom, you can't do this. You won't be able to get back." "I know," he said, as he started pulling his way along the lifeline back to the ship. "No, come back, Tom. Please, come back. Forget the satellite. Come back and explore the cities. I'll go with you. Please, don't die, Tom. Please don't die." "Ruth, Ruth, you're too young to cry over me. I'll be all right. Don't worry." "No, it isn't fair." "It never is," Tom said. "Listen, Ruth, I've been dead a long time. Since the bombs fell, I guess. My world died then, and I died with it. When I came to the settlement, when I agreed to make this flight, I think we all knew I'd never return, even if we wouldn't admit it to ourselves. But I'm just one man, Ruth, one small part of the story. The story goes on with or without me. There's tomorrow, your tomorrow. I've got no place in it, but it belongs to you. So don't waste your time crying over a man who died 18 years ago." He snapped off his suit radio and went the rest of the way to the ship in silence. After locking the hatch and pumping air back into the cabin, he took off his helmet. "Good, clean, canned air," Tom said to himself. "Too bad it won't last longer." He sat down and flicked a switch on the radio console. "All right, do you have those calculations ready?" "In a few moments," Arnoldson's voice. 10 minutes later, Tom re-emerged from the ship and made his ghost-like way back to the satellite sighting mechanism. He checked the artificial moon's position, then went back to the ship. "On course," he said to the radio. "The transmitters are pointing a little northwest of Philadelphia." "Good," Arnoldson's voice answered. "Now your next blast should be 3 seconds duration in the same direction." "No," Tom said. "I've gone as far as I'm going to." "What?" "I'm not moving the satellite any farther." "But you still have not enough fuel to return to Earth. Why are you stopping here?" "I'm not coming back," Tom answered, "but I'm not going to beam the satellite's power to the settlement either." "What are you trying to pull?" Jason's voice, furious, panicky. "It's simple, Jason. If you want the satellite's power, you can dismantle the settlement and carry it to Pennsylvania. The transmitters are aimed at some good farming country and within miles of a city that's still half intact." "You're insane." "Not at all. We're keeping our deal, Jason. I'm giving you the satellite's power, and you're going to allow exploration of the cities. You won't be able to prevent your people from rummaging through the cities now, and you won't be able to keep the outsiders from joining you, not once you get out from behind your own fences." "You can't do this. You—" Tom snapped off the radio. He looked at it for a second or two, then smashed a heavy-booted foot against the console. Glass and metal crashed satisfactorily. "Okay," Tom thought, "it's done. Maybe Jason's right and I'm crazy, but we'll never know now. In a year or so, they'll be set up outside Philadelphia, and a lot better for it. I'm forcing them to take the long way back, but it's a better way. The only way, maybe." He leaned back in the seat and stared out the observation port at the completed satellite. Already it was taking in solar energy and beaming it earthward. In 10 years, they'll send another ship up here to check the gadget and make sure everything's okay. Maybe they'll be able to do it in 5 years. Makes no difference. I'll still be here. The End of A Long Way Back by Ben Bova.
The Nobles Are Coming by Jean Cross. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Kaitlyn Vanadestine. The Nobles Are Coming by Jean Cross. I rested on reaching what seemed to be the top of the incline, and leaned back against the wall of the cave. For a moment the silence was unbroken, and then in the darkness there was a whisper of movement, an unseen stirring that was stilled by my involuntary voiceless cry, "What's there?" With only a blurred memory of having reached for it, I found my gun in my hand. "Don't shoot," said a burry voice. "Allow me to introduce myself. Mr. J.J. Abrogado, Abrogado, Serbo-Croat prospector, at your service." I lowered the gun hesitantly, letting it waver in the general direction from which the voice came. It was a strange introduction, but the possessor of the voice must have been as frightened by my bursting suddenly into the cave as I had been on finding it already occupied. "What are you doing here?" I asked. "That's supposed to be my question," said Mr. J.J. Abrogado. "Who are you, and what was it that frightened you?" "Sorry," I apologized. "My name's Ross. I'm an archaeologist. I was on a trip alone in my ground car when it broke down. Being no mechanic, I couldn't fix it. I decided to walk back to Marsport. I walked all day and most of this night when, well, listen." I bent my head to one side. Through the earphones of my head warmer, I could hear from far away a vague presentiment of movement, a dim blur upon the horizon of sound. "The night runners," said Abrogado in recognition. "I thought it might have been something else that frightened you." There was an unspoken question in his silence. "What?" I asked, wondering. The cave was like a bottle of blackness. I could see nothing of my companion, not even his head and shoulders, which must have been thrust rather sharply forward. "The nobles," said the prospector. "I thought perhaps you had seen a noble." The presentiment of movement had become a distant murmur, and my hand against the cave wall could detect a soft, smooth trembling. "No, I didn't see a noble," I answered. "In fact, I've never seen a noble." "Nor I," said J.J. Abrogado. There was silence again. It lasted for long minutes. There was nothing in my universe but the solidity of cave wall and floor, and in the background the growing murmur of the night runners. "I've seen a man who saw a noble, though," I said at last. "What was left of him they brought into the base hospital at Marsport on a rubber blanket and placed in a tub. Nothing was missing, but he was peeled." I might just as well have said shelled or husked, as if something had tried to turn him inside out. The murmur was now the sound of a rising tide. The man I had seen in the tub had been one of the few missing men who had been found. The others had never been seen again. They had been archaeologists exploring isolated Martian ruins or prospectors seeking precious metals. As if aware of my thoughts, Abrogado said, "Most of the missing were prospectors. I'm a prospector." Instantly I regretted having contributed anything about nobles to the conversation. I remembered all the stories I had ever heard about Martian prospectors gone mad, and here was one seemingly obsessed with the fear of falling into the two-fingered hands of the strange creatures from outer space. My eyes were as accustomed now to the blackness as they would ever be, and still I could see virtually nothing of my companion, except for a slight lessening of the darkness mirrored in his eyes occasionally. But that lessening gave me 2 items of information. He was about my height, and he was looking directly at me. "The nobles," said Abrogado in his toneless voice. "Man knows almost nothing of them, as they can stop their hearts at will, and so are never captured alive. We can only be sure that they are stately, regal creatures, 15 feet high, who walk always with grace and dignity. Proud, sensitive, steeped in tradition, that is the impression one gains of them. But it's hard to understand how such remote, godlike beings whose lives should be devoted to beauty remain continually preoccupied with death. But then, standards vary, and what earthman can say what is truly beautiful, what is truly ugly? Perhaps the nobles evoke strange and somber rhythms from human diaphragms, play great symphonies of attenuated delight upon the nerves of living creatures." Whatever else Abrogado had to say was submerged in a great flood of sound. Outside, 100,000 ostrich-like creatures were racing madly through the night, their thick legs drumming against the desert sands. The cave was filled with the echoing thunder of their passing. If it hadn't been for them, I would have flung myself out of the cave to avoid sharing for another moment the company of the mad prospector. But nothing could stand before the impact of that terrible explosive migration which had mystified zoologists for so many years. Actually, I was being needlessly alarmed. After all, I was armed. What did I have to fear from a moonstruck old man? Nevertheless, I had an uneasy picture of him standing near, waiting for the turmoil to subside, his face gaunt and shadowed by a heavy beard. For once I wished I had the noble's ability to see in the dark. Minutes passed while the drumming drained slowly away. "I'm glad that's over," said Abrogado. "I have some questions to ask you. I have been isolated in the desert for many months. You are the first human I have seen for a long while." "Go ahead," I said absently. I was wondering just how the missing prospectors had been trapped. I pictured nobles crouching in a cave, waiting for one of the poor devils to enter. But that wasn't likely. Their bodies were formed of large cartilage-like sections which were too rigid to permit them to crouch or kneel. Physiologically, they had but two choices: to draw themselves up to their full height of 15 feet or to lie flat upon the ground. In reply to Abrogado's questions, I chatted lightly about the new shops and homes and the population figures as shown in the latest census of Marsport. Abrogado asked, "Have you seen the new interstellar ship? The stellar missile?" I nodded. "Yes, I've seen it. They're still putting the finishing touches on it, painting, insulated, and so on." The existence of the great ship, long under secret construction, had just been revealed to the populaces of the inner worlds. It was being constructed on Mars, as it would be easier to lift from the red planet than from Earth. The nose of the stellar missile was pointed outward in the general, but specifically unknown, direction of the home planet of the nobles. "What star is it investigating first?" asked Abrogado. "Oh, a very likely star," I said, "considering the evidence. Sirius." "So it is Mira," mused the other. "I know little of astronomy, but it doesn't seem a likely star to me." I touched the open face of my watch, feeling the hands. I knew that in a few minutes it would be not dawn, but daylight. Because of its light atmospheric envelope, there is no true twilight or dawn on Mars. The sun just suddenly waxes into brightness in about the same length of time as it takes the glow in a television tube to wane into darkness, and so in a few minutes I would see my companion for the first time. "I have an idea," I said, "as to how we can deal with the nobles when we find them." "Yes?" asked Abrogado. "Mind if I sit down?" I asked. I loosened my harness, unbuckling my belt. "Have you heard of J-bombs?" I said, and dropped. Before I struck the floor, my gun-weighted hand had leapt out, and the silence was shredded by a staccato blast of sound. I jackknifed upwards, holding the trigger tight against the butt, emptying destruction into the night with desperate haste. My gun brought its stuttered sentence to a halt, and as if a period were being added by the pen of chance, there was the metallic punctuation of a heavy object dropping to the ground. Then, miraculously, the interior of the cave brimmed with radiance, and objects stood out in stark relief. There was a glint of brightness on metal. A gun of strange design lay directly before me, and above me the explosion-pocked body of a noble hung suspended from the ceiling by suction-cupped feet. It dripped blue blood upon the rocky floor, its eyes vacantly staring. End of The Nobles Are Coming by Jean Cross.
Jackie Sees a Star by Marianne Zimmer Bradley. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Read by Thomas Copeland. Jackie Sees a Star. Introduction. Jackie's star was his own secret discovery at first, but then even Dr. Millikan became excited. Note upon the author. Marianne Zimmer Bradley is a New Englander by speech, habits, and tradition. Transplanted to Texas 4 years ago, she complains that she never has enough room to roam in the sand flats surrounding her dwelling. Could it be that, like Jackie, she much prefers the vast sweep of the galactic universe, and a splendor which makes even Texas seem spatially minute? So, you want to hear about the Edwards child? Oh, no, you don't get by with that one. You can just put on your hat again and walk right back down those stairs, mister. We've had too many psychologists and debunkers around here, and we don't want any more." "Oh, you're from the university?" "Excuse me, Professor, I'm sorry, but if you knew what we'd put up with from reporters and all kinds of crackpots, and it isn't good for Jackie either. He's getting awfully spoiled. If you knew how many paddlings I've had to give that kid in just this past week." "His mother? Me? Oh, no, I'm just Jackie's aunt. His mother, my sister Beth, works at the tax bureau. Jackie's father died when he was only a week old. You know, he'd been in the big bombings in '64, and he never really got over it. It was pretty awful. Anyhow, I look after Jackie while my sister works. He's a good little kid. Spoiled, but what kid isn't these days? It was I who heard it first, as a matter of fact. You see, I'm around Jackie a lot more than his mother is. I was making Jackie's bed one morning when he came up behind me and grabbed me round the waist and asked, real serious, "Aunt Dorothy, are the stars really other suns like this one? And do they have planets too?" I said, "Why, sure, Jackie, I thought you knew that." He gave me a hug. "Thanks, Aunt Dorothy. I thought Mig was kidding me." "Who's Mig?" I asked. I knew most of the kids on the block, you see, but there was a new little girl on the corner. I asked, "Is she the little Jackson girl?" Jackie said, "Mig isn't a girl." And did he sound disgusted. "Besides," he said, "Mig doesn't live round here at all. His name is really Migadolan Domir, but I call him Mig. He doesn't really talk to me, I mean, just inside my head." I said, "Oh." I laughed a little bit, too, because Jackie isn't really an imaginative kid. But I guess most kids go through the imaginary playmate stage. I had one when I was a kid. I called her Bitsy. But anyway, Jackie just ran out to play, and I didn't think about it again until one day he asked me what a spaceship looked like. So I took him to see that movie, you know, the one Paul Douglas played in about the trip to Mars. But would you believe it? The kid just stuck up his nose. "I mean, a real spaceship," he said. "Mig showed me a lot better one than that." So I spoke kind of sharp. You know, I didn't like him to be rude. And he said, "Well, Mig's father is building a spaceship. It goes all the way across the galaxy, I guess, and goes through—" "Aunt Dorothy, what's hyperspace?" "Oh, ask Mig what it is," I said, real cross with him. You know how it is when kids act smart. The next day was Saturday, so Beth was at home with Jackie, and I stayed with Mother. But when I came over Monday morning, she asked me, "Dory, where on earth did Jack pick up all this rocket ship lingo? And what kind of a phase is this Mig business?" I told her I'd taken her to see Rocket Mars, and she was quite provoked. Beth still thinks rockets are kind of comic book stuff, and she gave me a long talk about trashy movies and getting him too excited and overstimulating his imagination and so forth. Then she gave me the latest developments on this Mig affair. It seemed that Jackie had given with the details. Mig was a little fellow who lived on a planet halfway across the galaxy, and his father was a rocket ship engineer. Well, you know how kids are about spaceships. Jackie wasn't quite 6, but he's always been kind of old for his age. That afternoon he started teasing me to take him to the planetarium. He kept on about it until I finally took him, that evening after Beth got home. It was quite late when we left. The stars had all come out, and while we were walking home, I asked him which one of the stars Mig lived on. And, Professor, do you know what that child said? He said, "You can't live on a star, dummy. You'd burn up. He lives on a planet around the star." He pointed off toward the north, fidgeted around for a few minutes, and finally said, "Well, the sky kind of looks different where Mig lives, but I think it's up there somewhere," and he pointed into the Big Dipper. I didn't encourage the Mig business, but good gosh, it didn't need encouraging. I guess it was 2 or 3 days later when Jackie told me that Mig's sun was going to blow up. So his father was building a spaceship, and they were coming here to live. I kept a straight face, but I couldn't help wondering what would happen when Jackie got his Mig, so to speak, down to earth. Probably it would just ease the fantasy off into a more normal phase, and it would gradually disappear. One night in August, Beth wanted to go to a movie with some girls from her office, so I stayed with Jackie. I was reading downstairs when I suddenly heard him bawling upstairs, not very loud, but real unhappy and pitiful. I ran upstairs and took him up, thinking he'd had a bad dream, and held him, just shaking and trembling, until he finally quieted down to a hiccup now and then. And then he said, in the unhappiest little voice, "Mick has to leave his Erling on the planet to get blowed up with the sun. It's a little bitty thing like a puppy, but his daddy says there isn't any room on the spaceship for it. But he got it for his, well, I guess it was kind of like a birthday, and he wanted to show it to me when he got here." Well, I guess the lecture I gave him about imagination had something to do with it, because I didn't hear any more about Mig for quite some time. He kept Beth posted, though. He even told her when the spaceship was going to take off and when Mig's sun was going to blow up, or else where we'd see it, I don't know which. But anyway, he made her mark it down on the calendar. The 5th of November it was. Well, in September I went back to college, and, well, I don't just talk about things outside of the family, but my boyfriend, Dave, he was almost like one of the family, and this year he'd got a job working with Professor Millikan at the observatory. You know Professor Millikan, don't you? I thought so. I told Dave about this Mig face of Jackie's, and one night when Dave was over at Beth's with me, he got the kid talking about it. He humored the kid a lot. He even took him over to the observatory and let Jackie look through the big telescope there. And, of course, Jackie gave Dave all the latest details on Mig. It seems that this spaceship had already taken off. That was why he hadn't heard much from Mig lately, because Mig's daddy sealed him up in a little capsule, so he won't wake up till they are way out in hyperspace, because the spaceship will go faster and faster, and awful fast, and unless he is sealed up and asleep, it will hurt him something awful. And Dave humored Jackie and talked about acceleration and hyperspace and shortcuts across the galaxy, and I don't know what all, and Jackie just sat there and drank it all in as if he understood every word. Dave even wrote down the day when Mig's sun was supposed to blow up and promised to keep an eye on it. Jackie started to kindergarten, of course, about then, and I thought he'd forgotten all about Mig. I didn't hear anything more for at least 6 weeks. But one night, I was babysitting for Beth again, the telephone rang, and it was Dave. "Dorothy, remember Jackie's little galactic citizen whose world was supposed to go up in smoke tonight?" I glanced at the calendar. It was November 5th. "Now, look here, Dave," I said firmly. "You are not going to disillusion the kid like that. He's forgotten all about the silly business. Besides, he's in bed." "Well, get him up," said Dave. "Dory, get a load of this. The biggest supernova I ever saw just exploded in the north. Get Jackie over here. I want to ask him some questions." He meant it. I could tell that he meant it. I ran upstairs and bundled Jackie up in a blanket. I didn't even bother to put his clothes on, just a blanket over his pajamas, and took him down to the observatory in a taxi. I wish you could have seen the place. Jackie sitting on a table, in his pajamas, telling Professor Millikan all about Mig and the spaceship and the little sealed capsule and the Erling and all the rest of it. I guess you can imagine what a week we went through. Scientists and reporters and psychologists and parapsychologists and just plain debunkers, and the crackpots. Oh, yes, the crackpots. And then they dug up the records about Jackie's father. They couldn't even let the poor man rest quiet in his grave, and when they found out about the bombing, they talked hard about radiations and mutations until I darn near went crazy and Beth had to quit her job. They even talked about telepathy, just as if Jackie was some kind of a freak. We had to take the poor kid out of kindergarten. He hated that. He was getting so much good out of it, and he enjoyed it so much, having the other children to play with, and painting, and making those cute little baskets, and he learned to tell time and everything. And then the spaceship landed, and I tell you, we haven't had a minute's peace since. Oh, that's all right. I was going to call them in for lunch in a few minutes anyway. Jackie? Jackie! Will you and Mig come in here for a few minutes? A friend of your Uncle Dave's wants to talk to you two boys. End of Jackie Sees a Star by Marion Zimmer Bradley.